Hey, Bitcoin wealth builders. Welcome to episode 97 of Bitcoin Hard Talk. I wish I could say that this was going to be good in terms of the news that we're going to be covering today, but there's nothing but carnage going on all around the world. And everything we've been preparing you for over the years at Bitcoin Hard Talk is rolling out in real time. And so the news flow has got increasingly faster. And all assets are up. So all I'm going to say about this week in Bitcoin is that it is steady and it is doing great and it is still a fixed supply. And every 10 minutes, the block is turning into a new block. And that is by design. That is the consistency that the Bitcoin proof of work network is designed to give you. Money you can own, money you can spend, and money that has a fixed supply. In terms of macro, the economy is being run hot. They are taking the entire debt-based Ponzi scheme and they are pumping it into stocks, into real estate, into assets. The yield on the long-term bonds doesn't like it. The currencies are wild. And there is fixed assets, which is how you protect yourself, whether that be gold at new all-time highs or Bitcoin approaching its all-time high. And that's everything I'm going to say about this week in Bitcoin and this week in macro, because we got 5 major events that happened this week in the geopolitical side. And as always, I will leave you with concrete steps of what you should be doing to protect yourself, because this is no longer theory. And this certainly isn't conspiracy theory. This is reality. It's all around you. Everything we've been preparing you for at Bitcoin Hard Talk, we are vastly at a fast and rapid pace transitioning to a world of Bitcoin, AI, and central bank digital currencies, and manufactured civil unrest is the mechanism to get you there. There is no stopping this train. All you can do is protect yourself and accept what is happening. And there is no room in order to deny what is happening. Because if you wait till it's too late, then unfortunately you're going to find yourself on the wrong side of what we've been warning against. So we have 5 things that we're going to be covering in this week in geopolitics. Firstly, if we have not met already, my name is Simon Dixon. And normally I'd be covering this in 3 parts. This week in Bitcoin, this week in macro, this week in geopolitics. We have already done this week in Bitcoin and this week in macro in the intro. We're going to be covering 5 parts of this week in geopolitics. If we haven't met already, I spent the last 25 years of my life obsessing over the topics of money and investing in order to understand monetary flows to make geo-financial predictions. And that led me to Bitcoin 14 years ago, where I spoke at the first Bitcoin conference and wrote the first published book in the world to include Bitcoin, and invested in over 100 of companies in Bitcoin, some of which became the largest companies in the sector. Ever since then, I've been documenting the entire journey to help people transition to a world of Bitcoin, AI, and central bank digital currencies. Bitcoin gave me all the freedom that I needed. So there is no ads, there is no sponsorship, there is no agenda, there is no upsell, there is nothing other than you helping us get this content out to as many people as possible. Because here's the 5 topics that we're going to be covering in this week in macroeconomics. This week alone, just this week, there was a strike by Israel in Qatar. That is a major geopolitical event that some of you might not even know the consequences and what likely comes next. There was also a Russia and Ukraine conflict, 19 drones that came over Poland, and we're going to have to understand what the impact is on the proof of weapons network and what they're up to so that we can get ahead and get past the narrative, follow the money, so that we can understand what is likely to come next. We also had US strikes in Venezuela on a boat. I think that was a couple of weeks ago, but we haven't had time to cover it yet. But it is still fresh because there was massive escalation. And we need to think about what is behind this. What is behind this in this new narrative that is popping up out of the blue, and what does it mean? And in the US, we had the Charlie Kirk assassination. Why is that happening? What does it mean? We'll be discussing everything that we need to know in order to react to what's coming next. Because have no doubt, the proof of weapons network is already politicizing and utilizing this assassination as a tool, because that's all they care about. Dead or alive, they will utilize it as a tool. That's why I call it a proof of weapons network. They weaponize violence. They weaponize war. They weaponize technology. They weaponize finance. They weaponize currencies. They weaponize technology. They weaponize military force. Everything is a weapon for the proof of weapons network to prop up a debt-based Ponzi scheme that is in the final stage of its cycle, and it's now taking those weapons and bringing them back to the West after using them all around the world and creating death and destruction absolutely everywhere. And I want, finally, the fifth topic is a reminder that we had events on September the 10th with the Charlie Kirk assassination, which led to September the 11th, a rediversion away from what that really was. We're now on September the 12th, where we have Bitcoin Hard Talk, and tomorrow is September the 13th, where the next phase of the UK manufactured civil unrest campaign for the profits of Palantir and the proof of weapons network begins. And you have to decide what you're going to be doing. So without further ado, we're going to go into the first topic. And this first topic is about what it means. Why was there a strike from Israel in Qatar? And why is that different from everything that we've seen over the last 2 years, where it's already raged war in 7 different countries and now is bombing inside US ally and GCC member Qatar? So let's understand the geopolitical consequences. Now, with each of these sections, the first 4 sections, I'm going to play a little AI summary of a blog that I will be releasing next week for those that actually want a reminder and want to dig deeper into each of these. So I'm going to play the first AI summary that took the blog that I'm going to be releasing next week and summarized it for you just in case you don't get through, because the news flow is absolutely wild. So Azad, let's play the first AI summary on Qatar.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're digging into Simon Dixon's analysis. He's got this really interesting geofinancial way of looking at things. You know, he talks about a proof of weapons network, basically tracking the money behind conflicts. And our focus today is his take on the Qatar strike by Israel and its geopolitical consequences.
Right. And for you listening, the goal here really is to see how just one calculated action can send ripples outwards, changing a whole region, understanding these financial undercurrents, the stuff Dixon tracks with his network, like who's funding what, how profits keep flowing. It's key if you want to really get what's going on beyond the headlines.
Okay, so Dixon mentions this idea of a managed conflict that existed since October 7th, before this strike in Doha. What did that actually look like?
Yeah, managed conflict kind of hits the nail on the head. It was tense, the sort of equilibrium. Dixon's point is that most players, pretty much everyone except Gaza, really kind of tolerated it. Why? Well, because it kept energy flowing, mostly. The arms trade kept going. It stopped things escalating into a massive regional war.
A delicate balance, then. Maybe a bit cynical.
You could say that. Delicate, maybe cynical, yeah. And that balance, the Doha strike just smashed it completely.
So the strike in Doha, Dixon is pretty clear he sees it as absolutely deliberate, not an accident, a real pivot point. Why is he so sure?
Oh, absolutely deliberate, highly coordinated. The analysis suggests it was specifically designed to cut Hamas off from their safe haven in Qatar, period. It's a major strategic hit. It breaks Qatar's monopoly on mediating these things, and it sends a chilling message, really. Diplomatic cover doesn't mean you're safe.
Right. And Qatar's been in this tricky spot for years, hosting Hamas. How does this strike affect them now? What's their move?
Well, this is where it gets interesting strategically for Qatar. If they just kick Hamas out directly, it would look bad. Right? Like betraying the Palestinian cause. Politically difficult. But the strike, it sort of externalizes the decision for them. It gives them plausible deniability.
Ah, okay, so they can frame it differently.
Exactly. They can say, look, our sovereignty was violated. We just can't keep hosting Hamas like this anymore. It turns a potentially weak position into defending their own sovereignty. And Hamas, Dixon reckons they'll have to move, probably Beirut or maybe Tehran.
That's quite the strategic judo move. Dixon also talks about a new diplomatic group emerging from this. Who's involved and what's their leverage?
Yeah, this is potentially a big shift. We could be looking at Saudi Arabia, Egypt, maybe France stepping up more, with the U.S. involved too, of course. And their leverage, increasingly financial, according to Dixon. They can start tying Israeli trade, benefits, investments directly to actual concrete steps towards Palestinian statehood, with deadlines.
How would they do that, practically speaking?
Through things like insurance adjustments for regional projects, subtle shifts in where capital gets allocated, even gating defense support, basically deciding when and if to provide certain military aid or intel. And Dix's feedback also adds this layer. He argues this whole situation makes Israel look like his words, a weaker rogue state.
A weaker rogue state. That's strong language.
It is. The idea is it makes them seem out of control, which ramps up the pressure, especially, he points out, with the U.S. looking somewhat isolated, Israel facing a lot of global criticism, and much of the rest of the world kind of unifying against the situation. Apparently, even just quietly shifting, say, $10 or $20 billion out of certain investments by Gulf sovereign wealth funds sends a huge message without needing a press conference.
So it's almost a paradox. This aggressive strike actually becomes the thing that pushes towards statehood.
That's the argument. It could be the first real catalyst, Dixon thinks, to make the conflict just too expensive to maintain. To make peace, frankly, the only profitable way forward. There's also talk of this Paris track, Saudi Arabia, France pushing for a UN timeline on a resolution, putting a clock on it.
Okay, so wrapping this up for you listening, that strike in Doha, it wasn't just another event in the conflict. Dixon sees it as a fundamental structural break.
Right. The effects are cascading. Hamas is weaker, maybe delegitimized in some ways. Qatar gets to reset towards neutrality. Egypt and Saudi Arabia, they gain clout as mediators. And maybe the biggest thing, financial markets are now actively pricing this regional instability in the business. That gives Arab states, European powers, a new kind of leverage they didn't quite have before.
So the pressure is mounting.
Exactly. And the challenge now, as Dixon sees it, is keeping that pressure on, making the cost of doing nothing really clear on balance sheets until there's a real roadmap agreed upon. Because, and this is Dixon's final thought really, deep down, everyone knows that ultimately peace will be profitable.
Okay. So I know that almost everybody that watches my show will disagree with that analysis because they're reading the headlines and they're also watching the managed coordinated campaign and the internal struggle, which they think is to do with sovereign nations, whether it be Israel or America. But anybody that's been a long-term watcher of my content knows that both are controlled by the same proof of weapons network. The same network that controls Europe, America, Canada, Australia, Israel. It is the same network that is negotiating the internal struggle between the profits of the banks and the financial industrial complex and the forever war model of the military industrial complex. And yes, they profit from genocide and they don't give a damn. And I've covered the power struggle throughout the Bitcoin Hard Talk episodes. But as a quick recap, just to understand it, October the 7th was a coordinated false flag operation. That doesn't mean that it didn't happen. A false flag means you create a catalyst for conflict when the real goal was to do what happened after the conflict. And if you've watched it, if you haven't watched it yet, please go to simondixon.com, go to my blog section and type in atrocity. You will see the documentary Atrocity Inc. Now, if you believe the cartoon version of what happened on October the 7th with all the lies, then you will be very triggered by what I'm saying. If you understand how October the 7th really was, when you look at all the different sources of who spread the lies about 40 beheaded babies and mass sexual violence and all that stuff, and you don't see it for what it actually was, a prisoner swap, then you won't be so triggered by what I'm saying. So please watch that documentary. It goes through every single person and every single reference of where all the rumors came from so that you can understand the types of operations that not only happened in Israel and Gaza, but are now coming to America and UK and the West. And you will fall for them if you don't understand them. So please understand, October the 7th was an operation. And ever since then, there has been a financial, weaponized proof of weapons network and military and technical struggle in order to reset the region as a result of the Gulf countries, the GCC, aligning with the BRICS countries led by China, which led to the normalization of Iran and Saudi Arabia in order to create an alternative force against the neo-colonizers over the last decades in the post-World War II Bretton Woods order, which is the American empire, which is now fully securitized, financialized, and vassalized into the proof of weapons network, which is a network that through the control of capital is able to control the political and the government layer. The government layer sits below the proof of weapons network. And they create false flags in order to engineer events and manipulate the media in order to justify the actions in this neo-colonial empire that has now got this resistance against it as we enter into this internal struggle. Now, within the Middle East, they knew that from October the 7th, there was going to be a moderated conflict that was balancing the different forces in order to not move to a full-blown regional war that would have been absolute disastrous, because it would have been the continued forever war model where America and the proof of weapons network profits from the forever war and death, destruction, rape, pillaging, and all this stuff. And so another thing that I want to make sure that you understand is don't confuse my analysis for advocacy. You know what I advocate for. I would advocate for a very different solution to what is actually happening. But this is simply my analysis based upon following the money. So when I say these things, don't confuse that for me advocating for those things. You've got to understand that nuance. It makes me sick to the stomach what is happening, and that genocide has essentially been weaponized and tolerated by certain regional players within Gaza. But everyone is saying, why don't they go to war? Why don't they do more? Because that's always been the goal of the neo-colonialists. That's always been the goal of the US empire. It has always been divide and conquer so that they can't compete, so that they can end up a vassal state propping up the dollar and the debt-based Ponzi scheme through IMF financial terrorism. And so any escalation of war is falling for that goal. And so it has to be tolerated in order to put a competing force that is now resetting the world order, because the collective West, the proof of weapons network, has said there's not enough profits over there. We need to come back home and we need to do what we did to them to our own people. That's what you're witnessing. That's why I want you to understand that. And that's why I start with the Qatari strikes, because what happened over there is coming home. Now, what did they have to do? They had to keep energy flowing. They can't have the financial disruption of the oil markets. And so because they have certain control of that through OPEC and the other regions, they have leverage with the proof of weapons network because they can cause carnage there. US and Israel, they profited immensely from, over the decades, $10 trillion of conflict that the American people paid for, created global inflation through all that money printing, created this K-shaped economy and all this wealth inequality. But the US and Israel, they have a military industrial complex. The Israeli stock market is simply a conduit for the American stock market. You put technology through there, you do lawless things through there, and you pass it back through M&A activity back up to the US proof of weapons network. The idea is to print money and steal it from those that don't own assets and transfer it to those that are closest to the money printer, which is also a part of the proof of weapons network. The banks own the Federal Reserve. The banks are public companies, and they're owned primarily by the asset managers and the ETF providers, State Street, Vanguard, and BlackRock. BlackRock being the most significant at the moment. And so the more bombing that happens, the more profit for the military companies, and they create a whole process of death, destruction, bombing, followed by rebuild, build back better, technical, and everything that they've done in this constant cycle. And they decide whether to allow a competing force to compete. And the only way that a country can fight back is competing economic power, competing technical power, competing military power. And last week, we went through the Shanghai Proof of Weapons Network that's able to create this alternative force. And now the world has split up into regional blocks. And the US Proof of Weapons Network, the financial industrial complex, is actively managing that transition. Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, they're investing in it. They're slowly denominating ETFs into alternative currencies, and they're slowly managing this transition, but they want to squeeze every last bit of profit out of the collective West so that they can vassalize as much of it as its host nation, with the dollar being its tool that it can control. And when the dollar no longer works, it has to reset the order and negotiate with these new trade partners, which is why Trump was installed in order to do the tariff policy, to reset those negotiations. Wherever Trump goes, Larry Fink goes. And the technical players go, the financial players and military players, wherever he goes, wherever those visits go. You just see the politics on the front, and you think that the government actually works for you. No, their job is just to create a narrative that makes what they're doing for the corporate structure, the proof of weapons network, acceptable to you. And your job is to be a complicit for as long as you can. And the second you become unrestful, like we are right now, then they weaponize that into the technical industrial complex and build this surveillance state and everything they've been building. So anyway, they've had to fight this network, and there's different trade that they've had to either restrict or allow to continue. But the whole idea was to prevent a wider regional conflict and give Benjamin Netanyahu and the Proof of Weapons Network, who works for the US military industrial complex as a US colony, and at the same time create a narrative that they rule and America's like blackmailed, and they wouldn't do it if it wasn't for them. So that eventually, if Netanyahu cannot fulfill the goal of ethnically cleansing the Palestinians, which because Egypt was able to align with the GCC and BRICS, they didn't achieve, they could eventually have this plausible deniability, invest in the region, invest in a rebuild, and try and vassalize as much of it as they can, given that they're negotiating with these sovereign powers that don't have a Western central bank, that manage to utilize their resources for their own country. So they built sovereign wealth in order to negotiate from a position of weakness, from a position of colonization, but rising as the West gets increasingly over-leveraged. And so that's what these negotiations have been. And they don't care. They will negotiate death, destruction, and that's what they've always been doing. What we are witnessing in Gaza has been happening for decades all around the world. And at the moment, ever since China normalized between Iran and Saudi Arabia, you have seen Iran step back. US use the narrative through Israel that Iran is funding all the terrorism, but they've stopped, from my perspective, from following the money, funding any resistance against that. And so we've moved to this, and we even saw, while everyone was saying to me, you're crazy, Iran would never negotiate a nuclear deal, we've seen that those negotiations are back on the table after, remember what I said, I went through the play-by-play of the 12-day war. I said it was theater. The whole thing was theater to give everyone the narrative that they need. America could go home and say, we took out the nuclear program. Israel could say, we got strikes and we took out some of the IRGC hardliners. And Iran could say, we protected ourselves and everyone was given the narrative that they needed to take back to their respective people. Since then, we have seen the leadership of Axis of Resistance being slowly taken out. We've seen Gaza absolutely leveled so that we can move to the rebuild better phase, which the Proof of Weapons Network has always done. That, I believe now, with the Qatar escalation, marks a new signal, a new turning point into what I've been covering in terms of what America has proposed as the Gaza plan and what Egypt and Saudi Arabia and the GCC have been negotiating as the counter plan. And the only way you get the colonizers out of your region is you have to make it more profitable for them to actually invest with you rather than blow you up and kill your children. And that's how you negotiate with America when it's hosted by the Proof of Weapons Network. So the 12-day war was there to manage narratives. I personally believe right now, and some people get very touchy, again, it's not what I'm saying, it's what I think is happening, that the Axis are alone in order to move into an integration phase. And in order to get to that next stage or that next narrative, Israel striked on Doha. Now, this is significant. The reason this is different is because all of the previous other 7 countries, we had, there's nothing new. I mean, they've been bombing and killing in Gaza and West Bank and taking over more land and settler colonialism and taking hostages, from Palestinians. They've been doing that for decades now, ever since this settler colonial project happened under the British Empire. And when the British Empire lost its power, handed over to the US Empire. But I was on Spaces this week when it happened in real time, as the strike was happening in Qatar. And I was the one that was saying, Qatar signed off on this. The US knew it was going to happen. All of the different regional players know that it's going to happen. Everyone was panicking, saying, "Oh, this is World War III. This is World War III" on my X feed. And I was saying, no, all of this is deliberate. All of this is coordinated. And everybody knew, in my opinion, that this was going to happen. And what is different? Why is this symbolic? So, people were questioning me, saying, why would Qatar allow that to happen? They're known as a place, a sovereign nation where you can negotiate these diplomatic conflicts. And they also work with the US. They're a US ally. So what makes Qatar different from all the other players? So obviously the other players have proxies that were either funded by Qatar or funded by Iran or funded by covert forces through the US, through USAID, over to Israel and via the different allies and networks in the covert operations. And so Qatar is a GCC member, which means that they are a member with Saudi Arabia, UAE, Kuwait, Bahrain, and other members. Qatar is also an ally of both, a neutral ally of both Iran and both the United States. At times, they have different types of conflicts, but they also host the largest US base in the region. They also, with the understanding from US, they hosted the political arm of Hamas. And that was always what they wanted to do. Now, this was speculation because Iran stopped funding them approximately 10 years ago, from following the money is my understanding. But they wanted the political arm there. So people speculate that this is covert operations. And remember, that doesn't mean that the people fighting the Palestinian cause are the same as the infiltration at different levels. Whether there was infiltration or not, this is up for speculation. I'm open to different types of things. But there was always a narrative from that Israel funded it and allowed in order to destabilize the region because they wanted an operation like October the 7th to happen. This is a covert operation so they could take over all the land, ethnically cleanse and genocide the Palestinians. And they wanted to fund a more hardlining resistance versus a normalizing Palestinian authority. And there was always attempts to make sure every deal failed, whether it be, we see all these things with different types of blackmail with Clinton and Oslo Accords and various other things. Anyway, for the last 10 years, much of the funding of Hamas has come via the political wing and the office in Qatar. And then you have a military wing in Gaza. And that's not the same as the West Bank. The West Bank has a separate resistance, the Palestinian Authority, and no leadership from Hamas. Now that blows out the whole narrative because Israel has been doing terrorism, settler colonialism, bulldozing, death, destruction, massacring in the West Bank because they're taking over that land, which has got nothing to do with Hamas. Anyway, Israeli media often says that there was large funding to Hamas via Qatar. That's always been a narrative that you see there. Also, Qatar is a major liquefied natural gas, LNG exporter, both to China, both to Europe, both to Western forces, both to regional forces, a major one. They got the largest per capita GDP in the world in terms of sovereign wealth. It's kind of like the Switzerland of the Middle East for certain mediations that are controversial between Iran and Western allies and various other things as well. So when you strike within Qatar, that kind of breaks Qatar's mediation role because it struck the political arm of Hamas. Now, it was framed in the media like, oh, right, yeah, we were just targeting them, but they could have done that all along. Qatar has always served with the knowledge of both US and the approval of US as the shelter for the political arm of Hamas. And so when they go and they bomb that, this marks a pivot point. This marks a change. This basically says in the external optics that nobody's safe anymore because US is meant to have security agreements with Qatar based upon having a US military base. And even under, diplomatic cover, Israel comes in and strikes down the office that hosts the political arm of Hamas. So this completely reframes the conflict. Now, what happened? Some of the Hamas members were taken out. Others, the leadership didn't get taken out. And there was one Qatari casualty as well. To me, this is completely a transition phase, as I covered in the AI summary. This is basically flipping the dilemma that Qatar found itself in. Now, as we are moving to the next phase, where essentially the negotiations are happening between the GCC and the Proof of Weapons Network and the decolonization exercise, Proof of Weapons Network is weaponizing violence in order to get as much assets, strategic assets as possible. And the GCC is trying to hold on to as much as its sovereign power. And every time you blow up more children or you escalate, then the Proof of Weapons Network, hosted in the US, represented by the US stock market, gets more strategic power in these negotiations. I also covered last week that Netanyahu has kind of gone off his own because he works for the US military via its proxy Israel. But he's got his own agenda. He doesn't want to go to prison. He's on the line for international corruption, internal corruption, genocide case, which they don't want to fall out over to America. So at some point, America needs plausible deniability in order to make sure that their companies don't get sued for the crimes against humanity that they're committing via its proxy. And so this is kind of like flipping the board right now. And so because we're getting to that negotiation stage at some point, US is remaining isolated and we're moving towards this isolated area. But at the same time, Israel's becoming a pariah state. But from the external optics, they look like they're gaining more and more territory. They are gaining more and more territory. But eventually, when Netanyahu negotiates his exit, after the axes of resistance have been integrated or eliminated, depending on what the plan is, then you move to this next phase. And so when I saw this, I thought, okay, this is the next phase. And what does this do? It basically gave leverage to basically say, rather than betraying the Palestinian cause and expelling Hamas, they needed a way of Hamas leaving, but without them looking like a traitor to the Palestinian cause. And so the strike basically exited Hamas and downgraded Qatar from being the negotiator. And remember, every time there was a negotiation, Israel would eliminate the negotiators. And so this was another attempt to eliminate negotiators, but the leadership was able to get out of Qatar. And so now Qatar gets the narrative that they need, which is that we need to protect our sovereignty. And because hosting Hamas political arm is a problem now, they get to, basically have that narrative where they can be taken out of the negotiations and replace Qatar with more powerful negotiators in terms of their financial leverage. Even though Qatar has a lot of leverage, there are choke points in Egypt through the Suez Canal, and there is vast sovereign wealth with Saudi Arabia's relationship with both investments in America to vassalize America with the proof of weapons network, but also, this is different. A strike in a Gulf country is different to any type of country that has been destabilized with forever wars by the US proof of weapons network, virus proxy Israel, like the Lebanons, the Syrias, the ones that have been fully vassalized, and the Jordanians and various other countries. This is different to that. It's different to what we saw with Iran when there was direct conflict. And I covered, if this wasn't moving to a new phase, Iran would not be able to, target inside Israel without massive different reaction. And now we got the Qatar side as well, which is now in a Gulf country. So there is a trade-off. Qatar takes reputational risk. There is a cost. There is also a liability to hosting Hamas as we move to that. They can't just expel Hamas because they can't betray the Palestinian cause. But in my opinion, they fully signed off and knew about it as well. And so this was also covered by Evan on X, at the same time as well. And so basically, Doha gets to now condemn Israel, signal that Hamas must leave, which is essentially maybe they become a decentralized operation. Maybe they head over to Tehran or Lebanon. If they head over to Lebanon, then they got the justification of the next phase of escalation with whatever's going to happen and has been agreed on the Hezbollah side. Or they go decentralized, to be determined. We'll keep covering what the next phase is. But it's this symbolism. This is basically a strike that really moves things. It's like an exclamation mark, a punctuation mark that says we've moved to the next phase. Qatar no longer hosts Hamas. And now we need to radically shift over to a new phase of negotiations. This coincides with the alliances because Saudi Arabia hosted the conference with France. And then we got many of the Europeans saying that they're going to recognize Palestinians. You had investment from Qatar, you had investment from UAE, investment from Saudi. They've been essentially negotiating into this new diplomatic tie in case the Americans, with the proof of weapons network, are going to be the final holdout. And so we had a United Nations vote today about a Palestinian cause. I think we're up to 144 countries that want to recognize Palestine. About 10 of them are left, and they're small islands, which are insignificant. Argentina, which is obviously completely vassalized into the proof of weapons network. We saw how much, I'll cover this next week, the scams that Argentina are doing with their bond markets at the moment. Wild after the shitcoin Milei launched as well. You had Israel, obviously, and you had America. And so the number of people that are resisting against that is leading towards US being an isolated state and Israel being a complete pariah relative to the entire scene. And so America's leading up to being that last final one, which as soon as Trump gets the go-ahead from BlackRock, from Lockheed Martin, from JP Morgan, from Goldman Sachs, that he can move to the next phase, he'll then push it down to the UN networks. And in case that's not working, then they've got the European route as well, which ties into the European trade war and all the other different things that are being negotiated, which obviously culminated in what we covered previously with the theater between India turning up at the Shanghai Proof of Weapons Network in the SCO meeting with Russia and everything we covered last week as well. So Doha kind of remains this neutral place. It's got a bit of, embarrassment that came from this, but that was the trade-off that they were accepting. But now we've got this new coalition that's going to be in charge of the negotiations. And we've already got, in Riyadh, in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Cairo, Egypt, which is important for the Suez Canal as well. And now we've got this new player, which is having massive financial stress, Paris. So Paris and UK and France, in their moments of distress, are being fully vassalized by the US Proof of Weapons Network. They're being thrown under the bus. Their economies are being destroyed. They're having the immigration, open borders, those types of policies. They're ratcheting up the civil unrest campaign that we'll be covering in other sections. And France is also with 60% debt to GDP. The economy and UK, very similar. Their bond markets are getting more and more distressed. And Paris is essentially going into this September the 22nd UN meeting. And remember, the Security Council consists of Russia, China, UK, France, and then just US. And so eventually it will be just US with UK and France negotiating with Saudi in order to take this alternative route to apply strategic leverage as we go into the US decolonization exercise that we're going through. This is what I think we're witnessing, and that's why I think this is the next phase. Now it moves over to currency war and financial war, because we've had this destabilization of the market, no reaction from Qatar, so it went back to stability. And now you can use financial weapons of mass destruction in order to play the US Proof of Weapons Network at their own game. The Gulf nations can move their sovereign wealth funds. They can take moves that will impact insurance premiums, that will impact shipping and trade routes. Or they can just simply send a signal to Wall Street by even just moving some of their money from their sovereign wealth over to alternative investment structures. And this kind of signals in this network how far this can go until everything gets resolved and we move to the next phase. So I'm going to be watching the insurance market, the different premiums, the different financial markets. They can leverage defense contract, technology contracts, all of the different forces until eventually we get to this, what Saudi has always said, they will not normalize until there is a solution to the Palestinian state. And obviously there are those two plans that we've seen. We've seen the plan from the US Proof of Weapons Network, and we've seen the plan from Egypt and Saudi Arabia to invest 53 billion. And that tension is what is, taking longer, as well as Netanyahu negotiating his strategic exit, which eventually leads to the fall of cabinet and strategic over time vassalization of all the Israeli assets and what's been negotiated. So I think we're moving to the next phase. So at some point, we're going to see the recognition of the Palestinian state. If the genocide happens, the full external, the ethnic cleansing happened, there is no deal. So I don't believe by following the money it goes that far. But they're also using the humanitarian crisis, as America's Proof of Weapons Network back in the dollar has always done. But essentially, they're asking for the US military-industrial complex to end the forever war and slowly exit over time their military presence and focus on being a regional player. So that is why there is so much financial pressure. And that's why this becomes a financial and currency war. And you see the Gulf funds, the insurers, the energy contracts. You saw this tension with the Egypt deal, where Egypt will become a choke point for the $35 billion of gas flows into Israel. And then obviously that is 45% owned by Chevron and different deals, and UAE is involved in some of that as well. And that was pulled. And so you can see these negotiations happen as these different choke points happen. And stabilizing investment is kind of a signal that they can shift and send to Wall Street that negotiations need to move in different directions. Everybody knows at this point that peace is the most profitable. And that is where the region is going, because eventually America, the POW is going to turn on America and the dollar as it transitions to, and it's got money that it wants to make in the Middle East, but it's also squeezing as much as possible through its death, destruction, genocide, and the radicalization of Zionism as an ideology that paid the perfect pretense to recruit an army called the IDF that are completely radicalized through religious ideology. And then they combine that with the evangelical Christians, which leads us to the Charlie Kirk part. The narratives of those that are radicalized by that ideology to turn against Islam. And then you have the CIA funding of the groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and then Iran funding resistance against that, like Hezbollah, Hamas, and various other, this strategic tension that has been so profitable for US military companies via its proxy. So Palestinian statehood will come. I've covered how the plan makes me want to puke, but this is where we are right now. And this is what happens when you're negotiating with the dollar. This is what backs the dollar. And this is what the kind of awakening that's going to happen across America as people realize that the lie that they've been sold over the decades, just like it was when the Brits had to learn what the British Empire has been doing, the same type of internal, mental illness is arising as more and more people realize what they've been backing, what they were fighting for. And Gaza was that moment when you got to see on 4K video what has been done all along across the world. And then it's coming back to itself anyway. So we could call this what I think the strike was to move to the post-Axis order. Resistance moves to diplomacy. And there is operations with hardliners, or there is integration. But the deliberate war and the deliberate destabilization campaigns at some point have to stop. And what was the point in resistance? Resistance was to get to the point where it moves to, rather than always being, a tool that profits violence covertly, eventually it has to move to diplomacy. And that's what I think we're witnessing, which is why, as I said, in America, you've got the blame shift where they're allowing, the evils of the Zionism ideology to be exposed to the world. And then they get their blame shift. Oh, no, it's because they blackmailed us. We wouldn't do that. We would never do that. They have elements of truth. But when you follow the money, you know that the money always goes back into propping up the dollar, which is the whole thing that is propping up the death, destruction, and violence. So basically the Doha strike was the next catalyst to move to the next stage. This is signaling that I think we're moving towards peace being the only option. Now, although China was the catalyst because it was able to align via BRICS, via SCO, via ASEAN with the GCC, of course, America is just about narratives. So in the American PR machine, the Western PR machine, which is controlled by the Proof of Weapons Network and various factions, Trump is going to be the man of peace. That was his reward for managing this tariff policy to reset the world order. He gets to get rich and he gets to get his Nobel Peace Prize, has been my speculation. And eventually there is also leverage being applied on Trump, which is, let's call it the Paris track. So Saudi kind of went on an alternative track so that it could play off the European track which ties into the China trade wars and various other things that we're witnessing right now. So if Trump stalls via the proof of weapons network, obviously Trump is just, he's not, he's selected, he's not elected. That's how the proof of weapons network, that's what JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs all created by securitizing every asset and using lobby in order to control. And building a deep state under the military that does not have national interest, has preservation of the corporate structure, which is now a global institution. Some call them globalists. But anyway, governments are subordinate to them, and there is no exceptions to that rule. If you betray that network, then there's all sorts of ways you can tarnish someone's reputation. You can, at its extreme, assassinate. There's many different ways in which this mafia uses that. But eventually we have to move towards this, this permanent ceasefire is essentially being used as leverage. And I think the next one we get will be an actual one, rather than the fake ones that we've been used to all over the years. So yeah, Saudi and Egypt have been pursuing the EU track, and now we're starting to see all of these European puppets saying that they're going to recognize Palestine. And suddenly they found a heart. Suddenly they'll talk about starvation. Suddenly they'll talk about famine, despite the fact that their whole currency was propped up by that violence, death, and destruction. And so, that's why you've seen massive Gulf investments in the European Union. While the proof of weapons network has these demographic changes through immigration policy, mass deportations and civil unrest campaigns in order to buy up all the assets in Europe in distress and then turn it on each other so it can usher in the surveillance state. And so anyway, what is the final analysis of why the Qatar bombing happened? The end result is you get Hamas weakened. It is no longer hosted in Qatar. Qatar kind of regains its neutrality. It steps aside slightly, and then the Egypt-Saudi become the new moderators. And then we get this pressure of the US plan that was being put forward that only helps US companies. And then you've got the GCC plan, which only helps those in the region. And eventually we get somewhere in the middle. Financial markets did price in instability. And if they move to stability, then we're moving in the right direction when you follow the money. And the Arab European states is applying leverage against the proof of weapons network over Israel. But at the same time, that is the financial industrial complex, which is in an internal struggle with the US military industrial complex. US military want to make as much as possible, and financial needs to show as many returns as possible. And then miraculously, Trump will give a narrative to everybody saying, we created peace, even though they created all the death, destruction, and violence in the first place. Makes you want to puke, but that's how it is. So I think settlements is closer, and you can now use markets to enforce urgency. Just so you know as well, I created a bit of a blog series on the proof of weapons network plan, which is competing with the GCC plan. And if you go to Simon Dixon's blog, I actually had like a 4-part it's a 4-part blog series over there. And part 4 was called, what was it called? Endgame Gaza. So in part 3, we covered what the endgame looks like for the proof of weapons network, what they're trying to do. But part 4 was Endgame Gaza. And I want you to understand this because this is the beta test for what they want to do globally. So even if they don't get their plan implemented, it shows you in slide deck that this isn't conspiracy theory. The tokenization of land and everything they want to do, everything we've been covering in Bitcoin Hard Talk, was laid out in plain sight in this plan. And it was put forward by Tony Blair, who's obviously a pundit for JP Morgan and the Proof of Weapons Network as well. So please, everybody watch that video because it helps you understand what's coming next. Because I'm all about getting you ahead of what's coming next. You call it a conspiracy theory at the time, then it happens and it becomes a conspiracy. And then by that point, it's too late to prepare. It's what the proof of weapons network wants for the West. Because I said it's coming inwards now. It is colonizing inwards because it's a global network. It's ran out of countries because of the resistance against it in other countries, so it's coming back in. Okay, so that's everything that I wanted to cover for event 1. We're now going to move over to analysis event 2. This is why I had to do much more on the geopolitical side. So this was all about what happened with Poland drones. So our entire media was controlled and pushed out fear around we are never closer to World War III. So let's jump into analysis 2, which I've called the Russia-Ukraine 19 drones over Poland is the story, and what the proof of weapons network is. And so Azad, I'd like you to now play the second AI summary, which is on the Poland, Russia, Ukraine situation.
Okay, so you saw the headlines, right? Russia launches 19 drones into Poland, NATO ally under attack. And that immediate fear, Article 5 potentially being triggered, it felt like a major escalation.
It certainly looked that way on the surface, but there's this, well, really interesting analysis from Simon Dixon, the Bitcoin OG, that challenges that completely.
Right, Dixon. He's suggesting it's not what it seems.
Exactly. He frames these events less as, battlefield moments and more as strategic narrative management.
Narrative management. What does that mean in this context?
Well, according to Dixon, the aim is to keep Europe in a state of permanent fear. It helps maintain NATO cohesion, keeps everyone aligned.
And justifies something else you mentioned.
Yes, crucially, it justifies what he calls the endless profits of the proof of weapons network. It's about perception driving policy and spending.
The proof of weapons network. Okay, let's unpack that, because Dixon also argues this is why the Ukraine war just keeps going, right? No resolution in sight.
That's his core argument. He believes neither side, in a way, truly benefits from peace right now.
How so? For Russia?
For Russia, well, the longer it goes on, the more leverage they gain, arguably. Ukraine gets ground down, Russia consolidates territory, and it constantly reminds Europe who holds the cards on energy, for instance.
Okay, that makes a certain grim sense. But what about the other side? Who benefits from the stalemate there?
That's where this proof of weapons network comes in. Dixon sees it profiting enormously. It's this powerful trio.
Go on.
You have the military-industrial complex, the MIC, obviously feeding the weapons in. Then there's the technology intelligence complex, the TITAC, embedded in all of the surveillance and cyber aspects. And finally, the financial industrial complex, the FIC, which controls energy flows, sanctions, the actual financing of the war effort.
There's a whole ecosystem.
Precisely. And any talk of a peace plan, Dixon basically calls it theater. Why? Because a resolution would cut off the profit stream for this network, and Russia loses its leverage tool. The drama needs to continue.
So if this is the dynamic, what does it mean strategically, especially for Europe, caught in the middle?
Well, Dixon's view is stark. He says this isn't really about attrition between Russia and Ukraine anymore. That phase is kind of over. Ukraine is now a proxy battlefield.
A buffer zone, essentially.
An expendable buffer, yeah. Buying time. Time for Russia to slowly tighten its grip, its sort of incremental subjugation as Ukraine crumbles, and time for the POW network to push for incremental militarization across Europe.
And Europe itself.
Europe is positioned as the ultimate loser in his analysis, facing, higher energy costs, industry being hollowed out, migration issues, political division.
He mentions Nord Stream specifically, doesn't he?
He does. He sees that as a pivotal moment. It locked Europe out of cheap Russian gas and pivoted its dependence firmly towards U.S. LNG, U.S. weapons, U.S. financial terms. He points to Germany losing something like $100 billion in industrial capacity just from energy costs in 2022-23 alone.
Wow. Okay, so bringing it back to those drones over Poland, this is where Dixon's analysis gets really counterintuitive, maybe?
I think so, yeah. Because he looks at those incidents, whether they were accidental, maybe exaggerated, maybe even, manufactured, and calls them narrative weaponization.
Strategic stories, not just events.
Exactly. Stories designed to justify NATO needing this preemptive forward posture, to pull Europe deeper into that U.S. security dependence.
He calls it Article 5 theater.
Yes, invoking that collective defense idea keeps Europe under U.S. security management. And maybe it starts positioning Poland as the potential next proxy battleground if or as Ukraine continues to collapse.
So every incident, every missile, every headline
Is another transaction, as Dixon puts it. Another data point justifying the proof of weapons network's existence and expansion. Resolution. That would kill the business model.
So looking ahead, what's the prediction based on this framework? It sounds pretty bleak.
It is. Dixon predicts Ukraine will, unfortunately, continue to crumble. Russia will consolidate its gains. The POW network, it keeps arming the proxy, whoever that might be next, until everyone's exhausted.
And the end game.
He suggests a deal eventually emerges. But it won't be about saving Ukraine. It'll be about partitioning Europe's spheres of influence. Ukraine likely gets absorbed, one way or another, by Russia.
And the POW network.
They accept that outcome, according to this view, in exchange for basically a permanent grip on Western Europe's security architecture and economy. Europe ends up, in his words, vassalized from both East and West.
That is a really stark thought. Diving into Dixon's analysis like this, it certainly makes you question the surface narratives, doesn't it? It forces you to look at the different interests possibly shaping how we even perceive these global events.
It definitely offers a different lens.
But I wonder, is there a risk in attributing too much power or coherence to a single network? Could reality be more complex, more chaotic even? Something to think about.
It is indeed something to think about because there are competing proof of weapons network, as I covered last week. And we can attribute too much power, but the destiny of the West, I do believe, is set. And I'll be covering more on what you can do if you live in the West as well and you're watching this. So anyway, let's go into the story. Now, I think right now this is rolling out in real time. As I took a little bit of a break, I think the headlines are saying that 40,000 troops are on the Polish border in order to combat Russian war games. And so the war machine is pumping up the media to petrify you into being comfortable with all the money that you're about to send if you live in the UK and Europe over to Ukraine, to the corrupt politicians that get their kickbacks as they send the money back over to the proof of weapons network to roll over the US debt-based Ponzi scheme and pump the US stock market that creates more wealth inequality in the K-shaped economy so that they can pump more inflation, make it harder for you to live if you don't own those shares, and force you into owning those shares, which is what perpetuates the network in the first place. And that's why we exit anyway, a little bit further than I wanted to go. So the story was that they're trying to scare the shit out of you. They're saying that 19 Russian drones went into Poland. Now, I'm not here to say whether that's real, whether that was Russia, whether that's false flag, whatever that is. I do not know. But I do know patterns, and I do know how we need to treat it, because the result is always the same, whatever the outcome is. We can speculate on how it's happening, but that's a distraction in itself from getting you prepared for what is about to happen. So after the 19 drones went into Poland, there were 30 to 40 cruise missiles that went into Ukraine. We had all the usual pandits that are paid for the military lobby. All the pandits, all of the Senate members, all of the Congress members, all of the European prostitutes, all of the quote unquote prime ministers, all of the agents that are just paid for that might as well sit in BlackRock's office at this stage, or Lockheed Martin and JP Morgan's office. And Republican Joe Wilson came out and said, oh, of course, this is Russian using Iran's drones. So they need to mix in some of the Iran part in there, even though Russia's creating its own drones. It was buying drones from Iran, but now it's built its own capabilities as well. But anyway, narrative management is ratcheting up right now, and that was the reason for these drones, however they appeared. And please don't think that they're not willing for Ukraine to send their own drones, or the Proof of Weapons Network to send their own drones, in coordination with the new Polish leadership that is obviously controlled by the European Union. And his job is to give an acceptable narrative to the Polish people, while the European Central Bank prints more money and sends it over to the military industrial complex in America to pump up those share prices as well. But anyway, I personally don't believe this is escalation into World War III. I've covered this all the way through. That destiny was stopped because we had essentially the tariff policy to reset the world order, the installation of Trump, and a recognition that China had already won the trade war, which means that BlackRock put in more and more of its money into different types of ETFs. And we have all of these events in order to scare the shit out of you so that they can push the K-shaped economy and push up their profits as well. But it's lots and lots of positioning that Europe is in fear. They need you in complete fear. They need you, Polish people, petrified. They need you, Ukrainians, petrified. They need you, Brits, petrified. They need you, Germans. They need you, French. They need you completely petrolized and paralyzed by fear so that you say, I don't care that I'm homeless in a tent. I don't care that I'm turning to drugs to keep warm. I don't care that there is mass immigration and my society is moving to shit. We need to prevent the boogie monster, preventing them from coming in and creating war with us. And obviously, this is NATO expansion. This is NATO pushing out the narrative via USAID and other organizations, and the repackaged one that pays the BBC and the control media and all the different media assets that it controls, as well as all the pundits and useful idiots on social media that still want you to believe that this is about defending democracy. This is all about pushing US stock market, US GDP, US dominance, and propping up the dollar scheme at the expense of the people until you get to civil unrest where you can't prop it up anymore. Then you reset the world order, which has all been prepped for. So this is just proof of weapons network revenue and profits. They've got another $1 trillion that they can estimate that they can scam out of the people if they scare the shit out of you enough. So I've covered this previously, but I just want to do a bit of a recap on this operation and how I see it by following the money, and why I've always said every time everyone gets excited about peace deals, I've said this isn't going to lead to peace. They will not stop until they've got that $1 trillion of additional revenue, and then they'll somehow manage to move it to peace. And the reason that there is no resolution in this one is because it is actually a proxy war between the Russian proof of weapons network aligned with the Shanghai proof of weapons network that is carving out territory for the multipolar world order that we're transitioning to against the traditional vassalized Western proof of weapons network, which is the privatized, securitized, and financialized forces that are kind of asset managed via BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. And so the reason this won't stop is because the longer this goes on for, the more leverage Russia gains. Russia knows that all that America can do is print money, prop up the Ponzi scheme, and spend it to prop up the stock market. And they will continue to do that for as long as they need to do that. Lockheed Martin doesn't care about, the proof of weapons network, the military industrial complex doesn't care about America's national interest. They just care about replenishing weapons. They just care about making sure that sales go through so that they can maintain revenue and they can start to plan their next conflict zone that they're going to profit from. So, but the longer this goes on for, the more leverage Russia gains and the proof of weapons network gains. Whether it be land, whether it be energy, whether it be control, all of it is pointing towards no resolution to this conflict and a forever war model, a classic forever war model, but in Europe, coming into itself as a beta test for what they want to do in America and any neighbor of America as well. So this is just, for proof of weapons network profits. And all of these statements are designed to justify them. So basically, the model is the military industrial complex profit from weapons sales. Trump negotiates for Lockheed Martin by going to NATO. He creates a theater with Zelensky where the Americans start to think, Trump wants peace. He's the guy of peace. That fails, and it makes it look like it's because of those crazy leftist, wokist, radicalized Europeans, and J.D. Vance pushes that narrative, while Europe says, all right, we got to come together and we got to persuade our people why we need to pay it. And so they need the Putin narrative in order to say, well, we need to protect our country. So whenever it gets to the point where everyone starts to get pissed off, they then ratchet up a new narrative to show, all right, no, another country, he wants to take over the whole of Europe, even though financially not possible at all. There is no way on earth that Russia can handle the largest country in the world as well as Europe. It would be financial suicide. And it's obvious, anybody that's done the numbers and the maths. There is inflation in Russia. They're down to 15% debt to GDP. The bonds are actually going up. Interest rates are really high, but they've got their alliance with BRICS that is allowing them to continue this on for a lot longer than Ukraine, which is fully ingrained in IMF debt, the UK guaranteeing part of the sanction money, financial weapons of mass destruction, the wheat being used as collateral, the largest resource. America's siphoning out all of the rare earth minerals for Elon Musk batteries and other parts of the technical industrial complex and Tim Cook's laptops and everything that's needed there, and the electric vehicles. The technical industrial complex are benefiting because they're selling all these surveillance contracts. Palantir gets to test its new artificial intelligence technology. It gets to integrate it with those drones. And those drones are now being beta tested within America and integrated into AI. And of course, the financial industrial complex gets to manage and manipulate bond markets. And the more assets they can end up with at the end, the better for those regions. So peace is complete theater. And I told that to everybody when Putin went to visit Trump and everyone was getting excited saying Trump's going to cause peace. I said, sorry, the numbers don't match up. There's no way this is going to be peace. And so you get a failed peace plan. And then you get the rhetoric coming out of Trump, who's an actor from his days in, what was that show that he was involved in? Anyway, put it in the comment section to remind me. But he gets to act and say, yeah, I'm very upset with Putin, goes back and forth with all of this trade war theater with Modi and everything we're seeing as well. So the statements is the strategy. You will hear the narrative. You will see the 40K troops deployed. And all of that is just to justify why more and more money needs to be austerity on the people over to propping up the dollar debt-based Ponzi scheme through the euro-dollar market. So Russia, from my perspective, as long as the proof of weapons network wants to continue this farce and there is $1 trillion of revenue to be made, Russia will end up vassalizing the whole thing, in my calculation. As sad as that is, Zelensky, who was installed, was there in order to perpetuate these profits and this corruption to the last Ukrainian. And this is not going to end well, but they just need you to believe in the narrative for as long as possible. So it's going to be incremental. It's going to be, the longer this goes on for, the better. You've got obviously the sideline effects on the US debt-based Ponzi scheme, and you've got the Russian inflation challenges, but they'll carry on. And NATO expansion is the game. And what does it actually mean? What's the real mission? Well, the mission was to fully vassalize and destroy Europe, as I've always covered. They knew that this was an energy shock, and that energy shock would kill the German manufacturing base. And that's why Merz came in. That's why Macron is in France. That's why Starmer is in UK. The people don't vote for these people. They are not elected. They are selected through lobby power. And that leads to industries collapsing. We got negative growth coming in the UK, 4% inflation. The economy has no vision, no strategy. And Larry Fink comes over with Sam Altman in order to build how to turn the UK into an artificial intelligence data center. So BlackRock accumulates and starts to try and secure Thames Water to reallocate the water there so that they can send you a shitcoin and a token like they're trying to do in Gaza so that you can compete with BlackRock and AI data centers on whether you get your water or not. This is why the importance of escaping the network and understand and planning for this is important. Now, how do they get there? They scare the shit out of you because they create their migration crisis. Rhetoric is put out there. They manufacture violence. And this is essentially a political fracture so that the whole political process can fall down. And then the pre-crime solution that we've talked about, the technical industrial complex is trying to do, it gets implemented and they get to acquire more and more assets in distress. Who's competing? The Gulf is competing. So the Gulf is competing with the proof of weapons network. The sovereign wealth funds are accumulating more assets across Europe, is giving them more ability, for the Middle East to say, we are the new Europe. And they get to acquire more and more assets, which gives them the types of control to resolve the Palestinian cause, as we covered in part 1, by acquiring more influence and acquiring more assets. And the more people get upset by that, the more escalation, the more civil unrest we're seeing. And that is completely boiling over right now. So this was just Poland escalating in order to drive more narrative so that they can justify more weaponization and more NATO for fear and theater, which will lead to more money being sent over. More money printing will come as a result of that. More big, beautiful bills, more budget needed across Europe. And of course, Article 5 is the fearmonger, because they say, as per Article 5, an attack on any NATO country means that we all have to join. You get a spectacle, you get fear across Europe, you get narrative that we're moving into World War III, and you get complete complicity with the proof of weapons network in order to do that. Now, there may actually be a genuine escalation. The POW may decide to go from Ukraine to Poland, but it definitely won't be because Russia wants to take over Poland, because that would be an absolute economic crisis. Maybe that's the plan. I don't see any indication of that right now. But Poland is just going to be the next playground. And they were the recipient of the most amount of Ukrainian refugees. And they're going through the immigration types of, populism and everything that they're receiving right now. So anyway, this is the European trap. This is why Nord Stream pipeline came down. This is why the nuclear power plants in Germany were switched off. This is why you had these constant snap elections across the, and coalition governments and all of these different things. Russia holds the energy leverage. The only way for Europe to solve its problem is to stop buying its expensive energy from America and buy it from Russia. Is the only way this gets solved, and then to actually become sovereign. But it is completely under the control of the US POW at this stage. So US is going to gain some GDP prints, roll over the debt-based Ponzi scheme, and Norway will end up with more profits in its sovereign wealth fund, which, because of its partnership with the Gulf countries, and has been de-investing from Israel, and has been deciding that it will be boycotting and taking out much of its investment in the largest sovereign wealth fund in the world that we covered, the $2 trillion one. So this is a complete trap for Europe. Overpriced energy was the weapon that they used, and vassalization is the end goal. I don't see a reversal of this one, sadly. The immigration stuff is the tool. It's red hot. I just don't see how anything changes from here. I only see civil unrest, and I only see the technical industrial complex putting in the solution. And this is a typical proof of weapons network transaction. Fire drones, manufacture fear, push NATO unity across the media networks, and get more military industrial complex tactics. Then you fire some sanctions, and the sanction leads to more surveillance state, technical industrial complex, more control, more panic, and then from that panic, you get to leverage up, borrow more. The bond markets have to pay a higher yield in order to roll them over. And so more financial industrial complex leverage. And the UK is the largest lender other than Japan to the US stock market when we cover the macro side. And so they just become a tool for the US stock market. That's the outcome. Unfortunately, Ukraine is petitioned. I don't see any alternative that's going to come from this, and I don't see any type of different from that. Yeah, essentially the history is that you had the fall of the Soviet Union, you had the fall of the Berlin Wall, an agreement that there was going to be a neutral zone between Russia and the proof of weapons network, the Russian ones and the US one. Then we had the NATO expansion. Then we had the resistance against that. We had the CIA operation. We had the coups in Ukraine. We had everything that was released on WikiLeaks for anyone that's been following it. Eventually you need that partition. And the only way that happens is by Russia having control of certain parts of Ukraine, and the US proof of weapons network deciding it's going to partner with Russia in a BRICS corridor so it can do what it's doing in Gaza, try and get strategic leverage in order to partner and build a new financial side, get the rare earth minerals and everything we're seeing right in front of us as well. So POW secures its grip on Europe, and Poland becomes the next phase of this transition to the multipolar world order. So that was analysis number 2. If that wasn't enough, I'm sorry we got so much to cover. We had the next operation, which I would call analysis number 3. This is part 3 of the geopolitical section. We had the US strikes on the Venezuelan boat, and we're going to cover the impact on the proof of weapons network and what the real operation was. So, Azad, if we can move over to the third AI summary that frames this, and then we're going to come back and follow the money and figure out what this really is about rather than what you're being fed from the media and the politicians.
Welcome to the deep dive. Okay, so you might have caught this recent headline. A U.S. Navy strike hit a Venezuelan boat, 11 casualties. The official reason, counter-narcotics. Seems pretty clear, right? But hold on. Okay, let's unpack this a bit. Our sources, especially drawing from Simon Dixon's geopolitical analysis, they offer a very different take. They're arguing this strike. It's not actually about drugs. Not really. It connects to something much bigger, something Dixon calls the proof of weapons network. Now, for listeners maybe not familiar, what exactly do our sources mean by this term?
Yeah, what's fascinating here is how they frame it. The proof of weapons network, according to this analysis, it's this complex system. Think corporate, financial, military interests, often operating, behind the scenes. It's argued this network drives strategy, especially around controlling resources and generating profit, often outside normal government checks. And historically, they claim, things like narcotics have been used to fund covert operations.
Black Ops funding.
Exactly. So the war on drugs becomes sort of a useful narrative, a cover story for actions that actually serve these other deeper geopolitical and corporate aims.
Okay, that really shifts perspective.
Yeah.
So our mission today, dig into what our sources see as the real drivers behind this strike and link it to these larger shifts in global power.
Right. Here's where it gets really interesting, according to the analysis. It starts with Guyana. Huge oil discovery there, right?
Wow.
Over 11 billion barrels. Massive.
Just enormous. And you've got ExxonMobil all over it, Chevron moving in strongly too.
And Venezuela. They've reignited their claim to the Essequibo region, basically framing Guyana's oil boom as, U.S. corporations stealing their resources.
Mm-hmm. And if you connect that to the proof of weapons network idea, well, the oil is like a corporate crown jewel. Mm-hmm. Our sources argue any threat to Exxon or Chevron there is seen as a direct threat to the profits fueling the whole system. So you defend it militarily if needed.
And it's not just Guyana. Chevron's actually working inside Venezuela too, right? Joint ventures with PDVSA, the state oil company. Yeah, even with sanctions on, the U.S. keeps toggling Chevron's license. And the sources highlight this. It seems designed to let revenue flow, just bypassing Maduro's government and feeding the U.S. corporate system instead.
So it really underscores that point about protecting corporate cash flow, maybe even over traditional security concerns.
Exactly. The analysis suggests this isn't about national security in the way we usually think of it. It's about protecting specific, very large corporate financial pipelines. Plain and simple.
The sources also bring up what they call the China-Iran-Venezuela axis. Venezuela uses this relationship for, well, economic and military help.
Right, a kind of sanctions-busting triangle. China buys the oil, Iran might provide tech, and Venezuela offers them, strategically, a foothold right in America's backyard. It challenges U.S. influence there.
So that strike, what was the real message?
Well, the interpretation we're exploring is that it was a clear signal to Caracas, definitely, but also to Beijing and Tehran, basically saying the POW network will use force in this hemisphere to guard its corporate interests, especially oil.
Let's break down that proof of weapons logic the sources describe. It seems to involve, first, a narrative cover, like the war on drugs.
Yes. Then covert funding, maybe managing narcotics flows. Then aggressive defense of corporate assets.
Plus, profits for the military-industrial complex, the tech complex, the financial complex.
Right. And importantly, the domestic cost. That gets pushed onto citizens, often through inflation. And finally, it's about hedging against rival powers like China.
So that domestic cost part, that means you, the listener, might ultimately feel the economic effects.
That's the argument. It's presented as a kind of managed transition, corporate profit-seeking dressed up as national defense, with ordinary people absorbing the financial blowback.
And the bigger picture here, according to this analysis, is the U.S. shifting, moving maybe from a global empire role to more of a regional technocracy, especially in a world that's becoming more multipolar.
Yeah, the idea is the POW network can't control global profits like it used to, so it's turning inward, focusing more on its own hemisphere.
So what does this all mean, then, if this analysis holds?
It means the POW network is now focused on, let's say, disciplining regions like Latin America, defending its hemisphere's resources for corporate gain, and the costs inflation, debt get passed down. So that Venezuelan boat strike, it wasn't just random. It signals this new phase, an inward-looking but fiercely protective POW system.
So, to wrap it up, the analysis we've looked at today suggests that U.S. strike wasn't really about drugs, which, interestingly, the sources claim are sometimes managed by intelligence agencies for funding anyway. Instead, it was about shoring up this proof of weapons system as it transitions, descending oil interests, projecting force against that China-Iran-Venezuela connection, and ultimately shifting the empire's costs onto the American people.
Yeah, and the provocative thought from the sources is this. The POW network might be starting to, in their words, cannibalize itself. The U.S. potentially shrinking into a regional power, but one that fiercely defends corporate interests, maybe even at the expense of its own population's stability. Could domestic unrest even become profitable? It's a really stark idea to leave you with.
Okay, so I'm sorry to deliver the bad news, but all I can do is tell you the truth as I see it from following the money. If you are in the Central America, South America, and you are unlucky enough to be neighbor to the host country of the Proof of Weapons Network, US, then it looks like it's going to have to come back again after all the atrocities and the crimes against humanity that is committed over the decades in order to steal your resources. And I know that some of the leaders that are in these countries you may not like. I'm not taking anything away from what they're doing in your country. But being friends with America and allowing for regime change, we know how that ends. It never ends well. And I would not wish that for anybody, even if you are in some kind of oppressive regime, wherever you are. The alternative of America regime change is not something I wish upon anybody. We've seen it in Libya. We saw it in El Salvador. We've seen it in Syria. And we've seen it in over 100 to 200 countries that this proof of weapons network is willing to inflict upon anybody that dares to have resources that it needs in order to prop up the dollar. So let's go through the story anyway and what actually happened in case you missed it. So essentially the story that we're led to believe in the media is that the US Navy, because it cares about Americans, is striking in order to come after some drug traffickers, and it killed 11 people on a boat And Trump comes out and said, because there is a drug crisis and I care about these opioids and I care about all of these drugs that is leading to zombies in our street and all of this drug addiction. So it's framed as counter narcotics. That's the framing that they need so that the MAGA narrative can be justified to those that have been dumbed down and believe that this is about making America great again. But the reality is, if anyone's read like books like Operation Gladio and various other things, the CIA is the narcotics dealer, the weapons trafficker, the humans trafficker, the one that involved in all of these different pedophilia rings and blackmail rings and various other stuff. The CIA is the one that allows the drugs to come in so that they can fund their black op operations. How do you think they get the money that they don't want? They can't get congressional approval from? How do you think they have these slush funds that sit outside so that they can do these covert regime changes? The over 69 that were documented just through declassified documents. If you've read the book U.S. Covert Regime Change, this belief that the CIA is about your national security, maybe about 10% of it. The rest of it is for pushing corporate acquisition of resources and ensuring that no one competes, ensuring that no competing power, now that one has risen, it wanted to stop that for as long as possible. And what else does it need to control? Well, the Guyana oil fields, which is on Venezuela's border, is actually the largest oil discovery of the century. Now, who is involved in that? Well, there's 11 plus billion barrels, and this is in partnership, a 45% partnership with ExxonMobil, which is dominant, and there are also partnerships with Chevron vassals via a company, Hess. And so Chevron and ExxonMobil need to make sure that they get 45% of revenue in perpetuity, not just you get a contract and help us build these refineries and various other things. Through financial terrorism and international monetary fund debt slavery and the dollar, they get to make sure that they get revenue in perpetuity and install through colored revolutions their leaders, install dictators, whatever they need, pretend that they're defending democracy. And then anytime there is any kind of resistance against it, fight back. So there's a projected 1.3 to 1.5 million barrels per day that is set to come out of Guyana by 2030. This is cheap oil. This is high quality oil. And this is basically a corporate crown jewel for Exxon and Chevron. And so obviously they weaponize the US military in order to cover for what they actually want to do. And they say that they care about drugs, despite the fact that the US government, via its deep state operations and the CIA, are actually the drug dealers. They don't mind injecting, making sure that drugs get to the people that they need to. So obviously they also have Venezuela's resources as the largest source of oil in the world, but they wouldn't let them refine. And so by not letting them refine, they get their Chevron in there. They use their financial weapons of mass destruction. They use the old techniques. And then when Venezuela wants to fight back, it pulls up some of its old different disputes. There was something called Esquibo. Sorry for my Spanish. This is some claim that came up, which was a border dispute between Guyana and Venezuela. So this frames everything, as a Guyana boom. But obviously, a lot of it is being pushed into the US proof of weapons network. Venezuela comes back, exposes it, says that this is theft. And obviously, then suddenly, America cares about the crimes against humanity that Venezuelan leadership are inflicting upon their own people. They don't care about the ones that don't have resources. Suddenly, they care about democracy. Suddenly, Elon Musk wants to protect people and uses his multi-million-dollar following on X to engage in a neo-regime change operation. Suddenly, US needs to come back and reply and control the narrative. And so you get all of these different warnings. You get naval presence that came back. You get narrative saying that this is all about narcotics. You get the strike that happened on the boat, but essentially they're defending Exxon's balance sheet because they need to make it look like America is growing as it steals more money in the K-shaped economy from the increasing wealth inequality. And only those that have the shares get to benefit at the expense of those that don't have the shares, and the massive concentration into an ever smaller number of people that own those shares, and even an ever smaller number of companies that are dominating, which are all managed through the BlackRock portfolio as well. By you giving all of your pension to them, you giving your insurance premium to them, you giving your student endowment money to them, they get to charge more and you get deeper into debt. And when you're deeper into debt, you don't get to buy shares. And so anybody that is indebted to the banks get to profit, and this concentrates wealth further until the whole system implodes on itself through political instability. So Venezuela, basically, this is about protecting the proof of weapons network foothold in the US. And sadly, Venezuela is in the US hemisphere. And so no matter what, when Venezuela wants to partner with China with any type of alternative structure or creates competition, unfortunately, I have less hope here, because as in the Middle East and the global South, this part of the global South that is in the American hemisphere, I think it's going to be the source of any profits that have to leave their military and come back home. And so you have round 2 or round 3 or round 4 of your countries being used and you not being able to use your assets. So I hope that you're able to do that. But of course, if they want to partner with anyone else, China, it's communism, it's Cuba, it's a Cuban Missile Crisis, it's Russia on our border, which, while America is on the border with Japan and various other, tensions that are reversing at the moment and leading to this situation. So if Venezuela ever wants to try and escape, it's kind of like Iran when they wanted to escape British petroleum. The CIA and MI6 come in 1953. They do a coup because they try to nationalize their oil. They install their Western puppet leadership. All of the resources get used for the West. And if there is any nationalist movement to try and use the oil to reduce the amount of tax and remain sovereign, you call them terrorists, and then that leads to revolutions. And as they revolutionize, they fund resistance against it. You fund ISIS, Al-Qaeda counterinsurgencies. And then you end up with countries being used as pawns, which is what we've been witnessing for decades and decades and decades. Iran-Contra affair was a negotiation, a hostage for weapon swap. And then those weapons were routed via the IRGC over to Honduras and various other Latin America regions so that America could vassalize and pretend that they're fighting communism as the narrative to make America understanding why they're destroying countries to prop up the dollar. Now, there is another part of this, which is that Venezuela has also decided that they want to partner with China in China buying oil from Venezuela and pricing it in yuan, in the Chinese renminbi. Also, Iran has been selling drones in order to, we saw a bit of a military spectacle from Venezuela, where they've been pushing up their drone supplies via Iran, which has been creating some of this de-dollarization financial flows. But obviously this is in the hemisphere of America, so it's treated very seriously. So this has created a bit of an axis of non-dollar denominated barter transactions that are all being priced in the Chinese yuan in order to have these barter flows that are happening outside of US sanctions, which means that the dollar can no longer be weaponized. And so Venezuela tries to resist against that. And so now all of a sudden, you care about the drugs coming into America. So China buys sanctioned oil, as I covered in the SEO meeting. They price it in yuan. That creates less demand for the dollar. Then when there's less dollar in Venezuela, they don't lend money to they don't purchase US treasuries. And that causes problem for the rolling over of the debt-based Ponzi scheme. Iran supplies the drones. They tend to have this different type of network. You could price it in either the local currency in Tehran or Iran. And they also provide some of the refinery technology, which obviously China has been investing in and buying because that's how Iran is able to keep its economy up in an environment of sanctions, where those sanctions were implemented because Iran dared to try and use its oil for its own people and nationalize it. And so that led to this whole Iran being the public enemy number one and all the narrative that needs to happen as a result to keep that theater going. And obviously military makes a lot of money between this whole strategic tension between Israel and Iran that justifies the trillions of dollars that have been printed for these forever wars, which is why China negotiates between Saudi and Iran to normalize and create a resistance against it. And that's why we're seeing these extreme tensions as these empires are shifting in this multipolar world order that we're seeing. And again, like some of that is being priced in local currencies rather than the dollar. So you've got this bit of this triangle going in. You've got oil that is increasingly being priced in yuan. Saudi Arabia reduced the petrodollar from 100% to 70%. This is, China's become the number one customer for Saudi. The Gulf cooperation countries are buying up assets in the European side. The proof of weapons network is creating tensions to vassalize as many assets in Europe. It's got all these puppet governments, and sanctions are no longer working. So there is a movement and an urgency towards how we're going to divide up these different types of areas. And there's weapons trade that is happening that's creating a bit of a counter to that. There is also alternative finance. There have been trades that are being done in crypto. There are trades that are being done in stable coins and Bitcoin. There are trades that are being done in alternative currencies. And all of these different payment networks have been built and these barter networks. And that's why BlackRock is trying to control as many ports as possible so that it can manage this transition when BlackRock wants to dump America when the dollar's not as useful and move over to this multipolar world as well. Chevron is in Venezuela as well, as we said. There is a joint venture. Now that recently came back online after it going back offline. So this allows Chevron and ExxonMobil and to kind of have a little bit of control, or the US being able to do that. I think the partnership was called PDVSA, which is a key part of the Venezuelan oil output. Whenever America wants to prop up GDP, it gets to kind of toggle, turn on sanctions, turn off sanctions, turn on licenses, turn off licenses. It can create volatility in the Chevron and Exxon price stock. It can profit from hedging. And the proof of weapons network can use market manipulation, oil prices to try and compete slightly as well. But anyway, it can, when it wants to punish Venezuela, it can wind down the license, and it can restart them when profits is needed, like today. So if Trump wants to say we've got the hottest economy ever, and then it can turn them back on, and you can get a higher pump into the stock price and a pushing more of that inflation and that K-shaped economy where assets get pumped as well. Another thing that's worth knowing is this crimes against the shareholders as well, because a lot of this black op operation oil is done off balance sheet through these companies as well. And shareholders don't even get to see it. I mean, it's absolute fraud, but the CIA and various organizations, they get to keep that theft and that oil. Chevron does the contracts, but you get to have these covert operations that are funded by these illegal operations, which is directly impacting shareholder funds from the different types of off-balance sheet vehicles and NGOs. And that's how you get these National Endowment of Democracies and USAID that does all the illegal child trafficking and human trafficking as well. But anyway, it's a pump. You can pump the exports under the conditions. And essentially, Maduro is the narrative. And if there are genuine political, types of strifes within the internal politics and any human right violations, they don't care about the human rights violations, but they get to use them, and they can get Elon Musk to push out a narrative and do a covert regime change on X, as he has been doing. But anyway, it's all about feeding the US dollar proof of weapons network and making sure that the debt always recycles itself. GDP growth is needed. And inflation is the price that everyone pays if you don't own the shares. Okay, so anyway, you will see more and more narrative around drugs. That's why it was an essential part of the Trump administration. He said he's going to take on the drug crisis. But this is not going to be taken care of. There will always be drugs. It is the covert finance of the CIA op. And so none of that will change, but you'll get a narrative saying we can put more strikes, we can escalate more war, and we can make sure that we get more of these corporate balance sheets over to Chevron, Exxon, and Lockheed Martin, General Dynamic, and all of the different financial contracts that JP Morgan can do. And they're just essentially trying to securitize as many of those assets as possible. The domestic cost is inflation and money printing, and you get a big, beautiful bill that tells you all the reasons why you need to do it. And Palantir can execute the technical side as well. Okay. Yeah, so the key message I want to get over here is that the military companies never lose profit. Revenue needs to continue. And so if there is a war that's coming out of the Middle East, it needs to go somewhere. And I think turning on Europe and Middle East is kind of the aim of the game in their circle of influence as well. Okay, let me just check my notes and make sure that's everything I've got on what's happening with Venezuela strikes. So as a quick recap, in part one, what did we cover? So we've covered, in part two, we covered the Russia side. In part one, we covered so we've had part one, Qatar bombing, part two, Poland drones, part three, Venezuelan strikes. And now I want to come home and share the types of things that they're willing to do in their own country. And I don't want to be conspiratorial at this time because I don't know what's happening, but I want you to see through, and this is a very sensitive one, but all I will do is tell you the truth as I see it. You may not like the message, but in part four, I'm going to be covering what's happening at home, what's happening in UK, what's happening in US, my reaction to the Charlie Kirk assassination, what I think comes next after it, and a reminder of what's coming this weekend in the UK as we move to these civil unrest campaigns and the weaponization of assassination in order to politicize different agendas of the proof of weapons network as well. So what I'd like to do is give a little bit of an intro in part four. So I'm pretty sure everybody that's watching knows what the event is. There was a very graphic, and I saw it in real time on social media once it was shared, where Charlie Kirk was assassinated. People speculate that it was meant to go into his head, and it went into his neck, which created a very graphic that was shared around social media, bloodbath, where people had to publicly watch this. It happened in a university campus in Utah. And as sensitive as this may be, all I can do is tell the truth. Because the reality is that through the narratives that Charlie Kirk perpetuated, the Zionist narratives, for the last 2 years, we've had to watch massive crimes against humanity inflicted upon children, women, and everybody for the last 2 years. And throughout that 2 years, I did not see anybody that subscribes to that ideology mourn any of the children, any of the women, any of the consequences of engaging in a cover-up operation for the Proof of Weapons network. Whether that be because you were paid, whether that be because there was a business model, whether that be because this is your belief, after 2 years, pretty much everybody that has studied or been involved in this can figure out exactly what's happening with these crimes against humanity. And so the reality is that hundreds of thousands, I believe, once we get to the next phase that I covered in part 1, have been murdered by the Proof of Weapons network. And in order to allow for that to happen, you had to believe in a narrative that was being pushed called Zionism, and that required lots of people to push out that narrative and manipulate the truth. Those that were engaged in that for the last 2 years have not mourned or shown anything around anybody that has been worse than assassinated. I'm talking about torture. I'm talking about everything. Don't need to go into it because YouTube won't rank it once I say the words that I want to say. At the same time, I'm disgusted by people that would celebrate any type of assassination. I mean, people are celebrating this for political reasons. And that is a really horrible thing to do, because we should not become what the Proof of Weapons network has become. Whatever your relationship is with your faith, no faith, whatever it may be, we should never find ourselves in a position where we're celebrating an assassination, but at the same time, we should recognize when somebody has been engaged in perpetuating a narrative that justified the death and destruction of hundreds of thousands of people for the Proof of Weapons network. So because he did not mourn one person, I'm not going to do what's polite. And of course, I would never celebrate. But I just want to recognize that we have been watching a genocide that has been radicalizing people. And the person that assassinated is also a useful idiot for the Proof of Weapons network. Because if you have been watching social media and if you have been watching the news, you will see nothing but people that decide selectively when to care, if they have the right narrative, the right religion, the right skin color, whatever it may be. They will selectively decide when to be outraged and when they just don't give a damn. And my personal belief is that dehumanizing impact is something that I've been saying for the last 2 years. How you act, what you ignore is going to come home, because it's all a beta test, as I said. And I've been warning against this. And even if not, you're going to create mental illness in people that I believe was engineered and a part of the plan anyway. The mental illness pandemic, the drug addiction pandemic. This is something that if you study history, we have seen before. And this is something that I think is happening right now. So, I personally believe, and I've seen lots of people that subscribe to Zionist ideology celebrate every time there is a crime against humanity or somebody assassinated. I won't do that. I certainly won't do that. Assassinations are completely wrong. But please understand that this spectacle happened because you were meant to have the reaction that you're having right now. Because this year alone, there were almost 20,000 US deaths this year in a similar type of gun crime or whatever it may be. And you know that all of this is being weaponized and that this is a useful tool for somebody. For somebody to push out a Zionist narrative, Charlie Kirk was useful when he was alive. But for somebody else, and for the same people, he was more useful dead, and they are using it right now. And that's the sickness of the proof of weapons network. The shooter was allegedly arrested today. We had the usual theatrics by the FBI, the same FBI that lies about the Epstein files and engages in a cover-up operation for crimes against humanity, against children, and sexual violence. The same FBI that allows for the distribution of these narcotics. The same FBI that lies and lies and lies and virtual signals and says, we got him. Trump immediately came out and made a speech. And rather than giving a unifying message, he decided to politicize it straight away and say, this is a result of the radical left. And it may be. But who radicalized these people in the first place? Lie after lie, K-shaped economy, operation after operation, you know, a warped version of history that it was pushed by people like Charlie Kirk in order to hide the crimes against humanity that are happening on a daily basis globally, to make people believe something completely different to what is happening. And so Trump used it to rifle up tensions between the right and the radical leftist crazies, as many, many people will be blaming right now and getting really, really angry and seeking revenge for right now. Anyone that was pro-Israel, they came out and said that this was some kind of Muslim Brotherhood operation funded by Qatar and Iran, and that everybody get ready. This is, you know, terrorism by the Muslim Brotherhood, and that that's a great intelligence tool as well. Remember the intelligence of pushing out. Remember my whole video series or the blog series I created. I said they'll take both narratives. Don't think they're taking a side. They want people pushing out the Jew hatred. They want people pushing out the Muslim hatred. And they're more than happy to sacrifice people in order to push what they want to achieve. This is just a weapon. This is just a tool. And so anybody that's pro-Israeli that has been radicalized into that ideology, whether it be evangelical Christians or whether it be the Israel people, they'll push out their narrative. Anybody that has been witnessing the US genocide via its proxy Israel and has subscribed to the narrative that the US would never do this. This is just because we're blackmailed. This is just because we're ruled by the Jews. This is anyone that says we would never do this. They get to say it was Mossad. They get to pick their narrative. They get to push out that this is another example. And they'll push out that, hey, Charlie Kirk in his final weeks was switching away, and there was pushed out that there was messages with Netanyahu, and apparently he was about to change his narrative. You know, they'll push out, and all of them will be going down this rabbit hole, and they'll be investigating the connections. The truth is never going to come out. They'll do it again. They'll leave you picking the narrative that you want to pick, so you're not looking at the fact that this was an inside, it could be an inside job. And even if it's not an inside job, they'll weaponize it as if it were an inside job because they don't care. Assassinations are useful tools for the proof of weapons network. This is the force that has been created. These are useful tools. And if you think that when they've been doing it for decades and decades and decades abroad, and you said, because it's not our own, I don't need to worry or care. Well, now, this is what I've been trying to warn people. And sadly, Charlie Kirk was somebody that pushed out that narrative, which is a useful tool to the very same types of people that will utilize the assassin as a useful tool, or if they had nothing to do with it, find that Charlie Kirk was more useful to them dead than alive, because they'll use PR, they'll use clicks, they'll use it to push whatever hate and civil unrest they need. They don't even need a Zionist propagandist anymore. They've already divided and conquered. They've already created the left and right push. They've already done the Jews rule the world conspiracy. They've already revived old Nazi narratives. They've already done the Muslim invasion. They've already done 9/11 wants to take away our freedom. And guess what? We're no longer talking about 9/11 because this happened on its eve. Instead, what they need is reasons to help Palantir profit, because they know that they didn't need to care about your First Amendment right. They never cared about freedom of speech. They allowed us to all talk on X. They allowed us to build our social credit score. They allowed us to have our profile. They are ready to come after anonymous accounts. They are easily going to de-anonymize them. They already got through the Department of Government Efficiency all the data that they needed. They've already been beta testing occupation as a service in the West Bank. They've already been doing genocide as a service in Gaza. They've already done an integration with drones in Ukraine. They've already done crowd control in Saudi Arabia. They've already done a surveillance state and police state in the UK. They've already done that type of control across Europe. They've already done their policy of open borders and then close the border and pretend you're doing mass deportations while you have a privatized prison system and a privatized deportation system and a privatized military deployed everywhere, where everyone they arrest or upset is a dividend, a revenue stream, a way of creating more GDP, a new big beautiful bill, a way of printing more money, creating more inflation, rolling over the debt-based Ponzi scheme. And what do they need? All they need is a spectacle to get everyone angry. And why do you think the assassin waited for the optimum moment to create this severe trauma? It's what they've been doing. Whether it's a lone shooter, whether it's coordinated, they just see Charlie Kirk as a useful tool, dead or alive. That's how this network works. Just like Netanyahu used October the 7th for the profits of the military-industrial complex. Just like all the hostages that they stole from Palestine. Just like they don't care about returning the hostages in Gaza right now. They don't care. The assassin, if it was a lone person, he probably thought, I'm going to get that guy, whatever his ideology they didn't like, whether it's be his anti-LGBTQ, whether it's his racial beliefs, whether it's white nationalism, whether it's Orthodox Christianity, evangelical Christianity, whether it's Zionism, whether it's anti-immigration, whatever is enough to get the assassin angry, that is now mentally ill because of the society that has been created by the Proof of Weapons Network, because of these operations, because of this dishonesty, because of this record high mental illness, because of this record high drug addiction, because of this record high wealth inequality, because of injecting with whatever things because of the food being poisoned, whatever you want to do, all of this insane operations, then all you've done is thinking that you're taking out Charlie Kirk's voice, if that was your goal, and you've amplified it. Because this will be used in order to radicalize people into his ideologies, which are inherently, to the wrong people, hateful. Because Zionism was the justification for the assassinations and massive crimes against humanity that we've been witnessing for the last 2 years, which have been happening for decades, which have been happening from the original genocide of the Native Americans in the first place. This has always been the case. We're just seeing it right now. And that's what they know is coming. They know that people are seeing this. The assassin is just a useful idiot for the proof of weapons network as well. The assassins and the assassinated. And everybody's falling for it. I'm seeing how angry people are getting. I'm feeling it. I'm having to concentrate. I'm having to make sure that I'm trying to get this information out there, because we're going through this shift and people need to get ready for it. Them engineering mental illness. You think this is something that is just happening? Is happening across the West. That's what led to these birth rate record lows. That's why people aren't having children at the moment. It's taken an ideology that essentially engages in ethnic cleansing, death and destruction, and iconized it into evangelical Christianity and Zionism, that is an ideology that takes all three faiths, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, and completely spends out misinformation to weaponize those religions in order to radicalize people so that they can profit from war, death, destruction, destabilization, and resource extraction. And this is just a message. This is just a propaganda tool for them. That's all it is. And you're genuinely angry. You're genuinely upset. That's what they want. The Proof of Weapons Network has always known that divide and conquer is the strategy. It's a tale as old as time. And these are just new strategies for doing it. It creates polarization. It elevates figures that are polarizing. That's why you see the most polarizing figures, either their networks being acquired into these media companies and then being able to use acquisitions to push algorithms through Google, Meta, X for geopolitical, geostrategical routes. And you have these people that have millions of followers because they're playing the click story. They're playing the algorithm story. They're not saying the truth. They're saying what they need to say in order to get the sponsorship deal that they don't even know where that sponsorship came from. They don't even know if they're working for an operation. They don't even know who they're working for sometimes. But they know what they need to say in order to get that large following, in order to push out that narrative. And then at a certain point, you become a part of it. And who knows, maybe if you decide to leave, maybe if you decide to tell the truth, maybe if you discover the truth, at that point, you become more useful dead than alive. That's what I think happened. I'm not going to speculate on why it happened, how it happened. I'm just going to tell you what I think is happening and how it's going to be used. We'll find out more. And everyone's going to spend a lot of time trying to figure it out and attach it to their radicalized ideology that is a useful tool. So, the Proof of Weapons Network exploits tragedy. It uses it to manufacture consent. And now it's being used in order to do the very same command and control technology that you said you would never have in your country because you believe in Western values. It was Western values in the West that were used completely, that weren't used rather, outside of the West, and you ignored them for other people. We all ignored them to a certain degree. And now, whether it's karma, whatever it is, it's coming back. We need to be aware of that. We need to be aware when they're monetizing chaos. Are we helping them monetize chaos? Sometimes we can't help it to get our message out, but are we a useful idiot, or are we recognizing what they're doing here? Are we supporting the politicians? Are the politicians working for us, or are they working for the proof of weapons network? Are we providing media clicks, or are we providing useful that tries to recognize what's happening? I know what I'm trying to do. Some people will see that as me doing the same. But are we committed to actually doing what we're meant to be doing here? Or have you become so radicalized that you can't see what they're doing? And now you're going to be a prophet for a security company to implement some kind of pre-crime contracts, some military operation. Kirk was a product of that system, and so was the assassin as well. There was a needed demand in order to create division, and he bought into an ideology of division. And that's the tragedy of all this whole thing. It's the tragedy of the situation, and that we only really care when it comes home, when we could have got ahead of it. We could have just said that we won't allow this to happen outside of our country. We're going to commit to the information. We're going to escape the misinformation. And that's why I've always tried to follow the money and help people understand what's really happening. And you get attacked. You get called a conspiracy theorist. It's what happens. If you're going to be going out there and you think that you're in a place right now where you think assassinating somebody is a good idea, any copycat, anything like that, it's not a resistance. What you're doing is not resisting at all. You're actually becoming a tool for the very same force that you think you're resisting against. Because violence, I call it proof of weapons. Weapons weaponize everything integrated into the operating system of how it works. I always use the Bitcoin analogy. You become a node operator for violence and weaponization. Now, what are they going to do? Anytime you try and criticize any ideology, a lot of people are going to be very upset that I criticize Charlie Kirk's ideology. You're going to say that's disrespectful. Some people in the comments are going to say that's disgusting, that's disrespectful. That's what they wanted. And that's what this does. Any type of tragedy, like they will utilize it. It's going to be a tool for censorship. So we're going to be censored into speaking out against that ideology, and we're going to be ushering in through hate and manipulation the very same surveillance state. So what I want to do is I just want to give, before we go through to the final operations of what's happening, I want to do a bit of an AI summary. This is the final one of Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 97, where I'm going to be releasing all of these blogs next week. And it gives a little bit of an AI summary in case I didn't articulate it in the right way of what we're going to be covering so that you can try and recognize it. So let's do the Charlie Kirk assassination AI summary, the fourth and final one, Azad, please.
Welcome to the deep dive, where we cut through the noise. Today, well, we're plunging into a pretty provocative analysis from Simon Dixon.
The Bitcoin OG. He often has these sharp takes on finance and politics.
Exactly. This one's called Charlie Kirk's Assassination and the Proof of Weapons Network. And it offers a, let's say, starkly different view on political violence.
It really does. It asks you to move way beyond the usual reactions.
So our goal today is to give you a quick but thorough overview of Dixon's core arguments, especially this concept he calls the proof of weapons network.
Yeah, what Dixon's analysis suggests is, well, it's really something. He's basically saying events like Kirk's assassination, they aren't system failures.
Not failures. So what then?
He sees them as like integral parts of how a larger system operates, a system almost designed to create chaos and then profit from it.
Wow. Okay, so it's called to look much deeper than the headlines.
Precisely. Beyond the immediate shock and news cycle.
Okay, let's unpack this. What's fascinating here is how this analysis frames the event itself. The assassination of Charlie Kirk in Utah.
Right.
Because I remember the initial confusion. People were asking, is this real? Is this some kind of stunt?
That initial ambiguity is interesting in itself. But once it was confirmed as real...
Then Dixon's argument comes in, which is quite counterintuitive.
It really is. He argues Kirk's death, while obviously real and tragic, was actually less about silencing him and more about amplifying him.
Amplifying him? How does that work?
Well, Dixon puts it bluntly. It delivered a gift to the power structure.
A gift?
Yeah. Think about it. Kirk is described in the analysis as a mediocre but dangerous polemicist. Now, suddenly, he's sanctified.
Meaning you can't criticize his ideas anymore.
Exactly. Any criticism instantly becomes disrespect for the dead. Dixon sees this shift in perception as absolutely central to how the system works.
That's a chilling way to think about how events get leveraged.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder about understanding the immediate impact, doesn't it? And this idea, amplifying through death, it brings us right to his main concept, the proof of weapons network. Now, knowing Dixon's background, Bitcoin, blockchain, that name isn't accidental, is it?
Not at all. It's a deliberate echo of proof of work.
Right.
The idea seems to be that acts of violence, the weapons, act like the work in crypto. They are the proof that validates and strengthens the network's control.
Okay, so what is this network, according to Dixon? How does it function?
He describes it as a machine designed to create division, amplify fear, and profit from chaos. Simple as that, almost.
A machine for chaos.
Pretty much. And he says it operates in 3 basic steps. First, create polarization. Fund and boost figures like Kirk to deepen societal divides.
Okay, step 1, divide people.
Step 2, exploit tragedy. Turn these deaths into powerful symbols that justify expanding control.
So more surveillance contracts, maybe more censorship.
You got it. More policing, militarization, all justified by the tragedy. And step 3 is monetize chaos.
Monetize it.
Well, the media gets clicks, politicians get platforms, the security state gets bigger budgets, all fueled by fear, division, and these endless cycles of violence. It's a loop.
A self-sustaining loop that benefits those inside it.
That's the picture he paints.
So it's easy to see someone like Kirk as the enemy in this scenario. But Dixon flips that, doesn't he? Was Kirk the antagonist here?
No, Dixon's very clear. Kirk was not the enemy. He argues Kirk was a product of the system.
A product, meaning?
Meaning his rhetoric wasn't some original disruptive force. It was supplied to meet a demand manufactured by the state corporate security apparatus.
Wow. So the system created the need for figures like him.
That's the implication. And tragically, his killer, whether they realized it or not, also becomes another asset of the same network.
Because they reacted to the polarization the network created.
Exactly. They end up serving its agenda. The net effect, Dixon says. Always more power to the apparatus, more justification for repression, and another diversion away from the real issues.
Which leads to this really stark conclusion. Political violence isn't a system breakdown.
It is the system.
That's profound and deeply unsettling.
It is. Dixon calls it the fire state we're in, a system that constantly feeds on itself, where violence is the business model, essentially, the business model of empire turning inward, as he puts it.
So if that's the case, how should we react to events like this?
Well, this is maybe the most challenging part. The analysis advises against both celebrating and mourning these deaths publicly.
Neither? Wow.
Because, Dixon argues, both feed the same narrative machine. The emotional reactions are what the system thrives on.
So it's left.
He says the only strategic response is indifference to the spectacle and clarity about the system. Focus on the underlying structure, not the drama.
Indifference to the spectacle, clarity about the system. That's a powerful takeaway. Simon Dixon's analysis really forces you to reframe these political events, not isolated incidents.
But orchestrated moves within this larger self-serving system profiting from conflict. The proof of weapons network, as he calls it, just keeps consolidating control, one bullet and one broadcast at a time. His point is, you need to look at the real system, not just its outputs, however shocking they are.
So, thinking about all this, what does it mean for you, our listener?
Well, I guess it leaves you with a pretty big question, doesn't it? If political violence is the system, like this analysis suggests, what does genuine resistance even look like, or real understanding? How do you see past the spectacle?
Something to definitely think about long after this deep dive ends.
Okay. I hope the AI didn't misinterpret anything that I tried to say. I hope you can see the difficulty in trying to express what I feel is the appropriateness of what is happening. And I'm trying to push a message that I think helps us all rather than us all become tools. And so the lesson I'd like to leave you through before we go through what's happening in the UK and we wrap up, this is the last part of Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 97, where we haven't discussed Bitcoin. We covering all of the craziness that's happening in the geopolitical environment at the moment. The lesson is that political violence is not really a system failure. This isn't something that they didn't want to happen. This is actually the business model. This is actually how you weaponize violence. This is actually how you move towards control. And this will happen again. And everyone met so many people that you will see just lying to you time and time again. The very same FBI and CIA and politicians and Biden administration, Trump administration, Keir Starmer's, Labour, Conservative, they all work for the same network. They all work not for the people. They work for the companies that pay their bills. And you need to figure out how to beat that network without becoming such an idiot, a useful idiot, that you end up saying it's the radical left that is the reason for all my problem. It's those far right crazies, racists, that's the reason for all my problem. It's that Muslim invasion. It's because the Jews rule the world. It's all of these different things. It's LGBTQ, which is the problem here. All of these different identity politics that they are weaponizing through violence right now, because this is what they have built up to. So my message to you is, don't be a useful idiot, either as an assassin or somebody that's going to be assassinated because you're indirectly marketing the agenda of the proof of weapons network, and suddenly you're no longer useful to them, or you build such a position where they would rather use you. You are more useful to them dead than alive. That's what I think has happened with Charlie Kirk. And it's working. But how many people can we get together to make sure it doesn't work on them? So just like Tommy Robinson is manufacturing as a useful idiot or a paid tool, whatever you want to pick, there's more than enough evidence for you to pick whatever. And there's more than enough ambiguity to take you down your theory, as it's being propped up by Elon Musk, who is a vital part of the machine of the technical industrial complex, with his major shareholders being BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. And just as Netanyahu decided to use Charlie Kirk's death to say everybody should stand by Israel and agree to more genocide, more death and destruction, because he's a useful tool for the military industrial complex. And just as Larry Fink goes and meets with Keir Starmer, with Sam Altman and and other people that are negotiating with other sovereign wealth funds, and they'll tell you about they won't tell you, but they'll construct the next deal of the financial industrial complex. Don't be a useful idiot, is my message to you. The final part I wanted to remind you of, as we covered it in depth a couple of weeks ago, is that the UK civil unrest campaign and the immediate impact that came after the last campaigns around Palantir's sales strategy and Palantir's tactics and its increase in share price as a result of people deciding to profit from their destruction rather than become a shareholder activist and boycott it. So September the 10th was the day that Charlie Kirk was assassinated. September the 11th was the operation 24 years ago that created all of those profits for the military industrial complex, that was a useful tool that created all these religious tensions that weren't there before, that manufactured all of this civil unrest, that led to the death and destruction of millions, that radicalized Americans in order to think that they were doing it to get revenge for the very type of operation. And so more and more people this year were going to be willing to listen to the truth about September the 11th than ever before. More and more people know about the inconsistencies with the CIA, with Mossad, with the dancing Israelis, with the other intelligence network, with the connections. The whole thing is about to blow itself so that people understand it. And September the 11th this year was going to be that day. But what did we do? We're all discussing who shot Charlie Kirk instead. Today is September the 12th. And instead of learning about these operations, we're listening to the FBI as they theatrically say, we got it. And we're meant to believe them, that this was the person. And then all the politicians around them say, see, it was that radical left. See, it was that transsexual. See, it was that Mossad operative. See, it was the Russians. It was the Chinese. See, it was everyone. It was Mossad. It was Israel. It was the Jews. Pick your poison. The algorithm will tell you what you want. And tomorrow is September the 13th. And as a reminder, Charlie Kirk is being used as a weapon to get more people angry and out in the streets of the UK, in London, to want to honor Charlie Kirk for his Zionism. And there are going to be a counter protest from people that want to honor and stop a genocide. And those two people are going to get incredibly angry when even intelligence operative comes in and deliberately disrespects Charlie Kirk and disrespects the genocide. And you're going to be a useful idiot for manufacturing the violence, whether it comes from yourself because you're so angry or it comes from the operatives. Remember, that's what they want. And there's no stopping it. You just got to be aware of it. It's definitely going to happen. If you can't recognize the pattern right now, it's part of the operation. And so September the 13th is going to be a key milestone in Palantir's UK contract to manufacture civil unrest and roll out the playbook that is about to come to America and the rest of the region, as is already being done everywhere. It's engineered. What is going to be the result of this? Well, it's going to be proactive policing. They're going to use Elon's social credit score or Thiel's technology. It's going to be additional surveillance. It's going to be Patriot Act 2.0. It's going to be contracts sold based off fear. It's going to be a digital ID. We've already been told that we need a digital ID for immigrants until they make one for you. It's going to be a central bank digital currency, or they're going to make you think that you're maintaining your freedom in America by having a stable coin that just does the same thing, but for private interests. It's going to be tokenized everything, tokenized water, tokenized real world assets. It's going to be what BlackRock decided that they want to do as you buy your carbon credit score in order to have these command and control systems that are integrated. It's going to be unrest packaged as another profit stream to prop up the dollar while we move into this multipolar world. And we just need to recognize it. There's no stopping this train at this point. And you need to figure out how to protect yourself and the ones that you love. All of the logic that justified all of the wars abroad are being used right now in America, in UK, in Europe. It's the same reason why Qatar was bombed by Israel, as we covered in part 1. It's the same reason why Poland is sending 40,000 troops to its border right now, and it was droned with 19 drones as an escalation to the Ukraine-Russia conflict. It's the same reason why Venezuela was striked, and you were led to believe that this is something to do with narcotics and stopping or some kind of war on drug within America. It's the same reason why Charlie Kirk was assassinated. You got to see the bigger picture. It's to progress this operation. It's to create useful idiots. The US is going to be a technocracy under the proof of weapons network. Zionism and all these different narratives were the mechanism for getting you there. It's a regime. There's no doubt about it. And what did we get as an announcement, as a reaction to Charlie Kirk's assassination? Let me read out the executive order. Trump has signed an executive order delivering War Secretary Pete Hegseth to create a standing National Guard quick reaction force, a domestic military unit that has been trained, resourced, and ready for rapid nationwide deployment to support law enforcement in quelling any civil unrest disturbances. Under the order, Hegseth must designate Guard members in every single state, ensure that they are trained and equipped, and make them available for mobilization at the president's direction. There's no stopping this train. You just got to stop believing the narrative and the bullshit that they're telling you. Don't make them proof of weapons network great again. The only thing you can do is make yourself great again and the people around you, and look after your community. So here's my idea. How about this weekend, you take some of that rage that you may feel that might turn you into a useful idiot, and you decide to spend the weekend figuring out how to protect yourself and actually try and boycott some of the machine and build some personal sovereign. We got a few years, I think, as we go through this, but don't let that stop you. Don't be a useful idiot. On my blog, again, no sponsorship, no agenda, no business model, no monetization on my YouTube channel, no go there and any of this stuff. I'm putting out content because Bitcoin gave me the freedom to be able to do this. I didn't need Silicon Valley to bring me into a vassalized business. I didn't go public to be a useful tool for the military industrial complex. I left a country that's currently being vassalized by BlackRock. I prepared for 10 years. I tried to get myself money I can own, money that I could spend, money that has a fixed supply, so I could wealth my way out of it. I tried to bring as many people as possible with me for as many years as possible and create as much content as possible. And so another attempt on my blog, simondixon.com, I've put a 5-part video series that, or a 5-part blog series. I called it, preparing yourself in a world of crypto, AI, and central bank digital currencies. I say crypto because you need to protect yourself from crypto. And Bitcoin is the mechanism for doing it. It's the best mechanism I know how. It's not the whole solution. It's the best one I know that people should be doing. And so I think Azad's going to put on the screen, I'll just show you. If you go to simondixon.com and you go to the blog, part 1, what I'd love for you to do is, rather than being a useful idiot for the military industrial complex in a civil unrest campaign and a surveillance state, they've won. Why don't you stay in and actually learn how to protect yourself instead? Because it ain't going to get pretty. It's up to you to make your decisions. I just want you to be more knowledgeable in the decisions that you make. I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you what I'm doing, and I can try and share with you as much as possible. So part 1 in that blog series was called Why is there so much immigration in the West? And is the Muslim invasion real? Try and understand that despite your narrative, despite what you're seeing. Part 2 was a blog and the stats on, do Jews really rule the world? These are the 2 predominant narratives. You're obviously being put, the left and the right one is so obvious, the radical left and the far right, racist or whatever, all of that, those narratives are just obvious. Now, what I also created in part 3 is what I believe to be the proof of weapons network endgame and what plan they're taking us towards. It'd be useful to figure out whether that's a conspiracy theory, why it's called a conspiracy theory, and why don't you go through that video, that blog, where I put together what I think their endgame is. In part 4, I created a blog post called Endgame Gaza, the beta test for global control systems. This is actually a leaked plan by Tony Blair that goes through exactly what they want to rebuild after those war zones. I think it's useful to know what they're trying to do over there so you understand what they're going to want to do over here. So I created a blog on it with a video, with a TLDR AI summary, whatever tools we could put together in order to try and get there. And part 5, we put together a blog called How to Protect Yourself with Bitcoin and Self-Custody Before It's Too Late. A guide to self-custody. That's with myself and somebody else from the Bitcoin community I respect called Andreas Antonopoulos. This used to be a part of a course that customers would get, but we want to make it available to anybody on simondixon.com that's a completely free member of the BitcoinHardTalk membership portal. And why don't you learn how to self-custody? Because once you know how to self-custody, once you understand how to become more sovereign, once you understand how to protect yourself, you can boycott an essential part of the US dollar proof of weapons network, which is the Federal Reserve. You can boycott it by owning Bitcoin. Beat the inflation cycle historically, designed that no central bank can change it. You can boycott BlackRock by owning it in self-custody and learn how to self-custody. Rather than giving your Bitcoin to them to own it for you, so you give them more power, you can be a part of this 2-tier that I've talked about. Bitcoin in Wall Street and Bitcoin in self-custody. You want to be in Bitcoin in self-custody. You can also boycott the banks by not falling for their financial weapons of mass destruction, where they want you to put your Bitcoin with them so you can borrow against it. And I know how that feels. I've got direct experience when I messed around with those financial weapons of mass destruction in 2021. So why don't you learn from my experience and not borrow against your Bitcoin, or at least understand how to risk manage it? And if they don't create debt, fiat currency debt, but using your Bitcoin as collateral, then you can boycott the banks as well. Why don't you learn how to boycott the proof of weapons network institutions by actually focusing on what is my investment strategy for investing local, investing in community, building my wealth so maybe I can participate in lobby because the government don't care about my vote. Maybe I can become an activist investor. Maybe I can become more aware around what is in my pension. Maybe I can decide to spend local. Maybe I can figure out what proof of weapons network institutions I want to boycott. Now, it's not going to be perfect. I would love to boycott certain institutions, but I need to be productive. But it's about becoming more conscious. And so by owning your money and directing the flow of your money rather than have somebody direct it for them through using a banking institution, using asset managers, maybe you have a part of your portfolio where you can decide. Maybe it's time to learn that, rather than being a useful idiot for the profits of a violent weapons, proof of weapons network. Maybe you actually want to decide to relocate. I understand that that's a big decision for many. I understand that people have children, but maybe you actually want to investigate what are the best places to be. Maybe I live on the wrong side of the proof of weapons network. Maybe my government has been committing crimes against humanity while I call it the greatest country in the world and the beacon of peace. Maybe I'm asking for God to bless my own country while it's committing a genocide in another country. Maybe I want to work on my spiritual beliefs. What if I actually decided that I wanted to serve humanity rather than just a particular segment while we're committing crimes against humanity? This is the journey we're going through. This is all I know how to do. And what if you decided to help more people? If this message resonates with you, maybe it will resonate with other people. I know my messages will be offensive for some, polarizing for some, but I'm doing the best I can. I'm trying to help you see what they're doing, what this proof of weapons network works, why I got so passionate for 25 years when I was in the proof of weapons network, working investment banking, working as a manipulator of the market, as a market maker, working as a stockbroker, gaining more power for the proof of weapons network. Why I exited the system in 2006, became a monetary reformer to try and help people understand how this system worked. Why that led me to Bitcoin after my father lost all of his money because he was investing before the dot-com boom and bust. This is why I ended up getting involved in all the things. Everything I'm telling you to do were the things that I did. And so I'm telling you from direct experience. And I want more and more people to experience what I've been blessed with. And I'll keep doing that because the reality is today that there is a two-tiered world. You are alive at one of the most interesting and exciting times in financial history. Most people are getting wrecked. Others are doing well. And all I know what to do is make sure that you get on the right side of that change. And if you'd like to support me, if you're enjoying that, I will continue to do this with no sponsorship, no monetization, no anything. And all I ask for you is if you're not a subscriber of the channel, please do subscribe to the channel on YouTube. We've now got over 100,000 subscribers. If you would like to engage in real time and ask questions, come follow me on X. I go up on spaces regularly. You can come up and ask a question. If you would like to help me combat when YouTube takes me out, if they take me out, I'm not sure. Whatever the plan is, I back up on X and I also back up on Rumble. I got a small following over there. Please allow me to get a big following on Rumble to match my YouTube, because I'm not sure how YouTube's going to allow to continue. But I'll share the message as long as I do. So look up Simon Dixon on Rumble. If you listen to podcasts and you'd rather download these bit by bit and do it as you're in the gym, when you're traveling in the car, then go to Apple Podcasts and look up BitcoinHardTalk and subscribe and follow me there. You'll get a notification every time I release a new video or go live. If you're an Android user, do it on Spotify. If you don't want to use any of those systems, head over to simondixon.com. And I publish the podcast over there in case all of those centralized systems take me out. If you would like to not be a useful idiot for the military industrial complex, why don't you decide to watch that 5-part blog series and get a free login to the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal, learn how to self-custody and put together a plan to make yourself great again. Because I'm telling you, don't make the proof of weapons network great again, and your politicians are not going to make your country great again, because they're fully controlled by the proof of weapons network, and they are agents of deceit. And it's got nothing to do with the radical left or the far right or any of this BS. And no, Jews don't rule the world, and Muslims are not the reason for all these problems. The demographic change was engineered, it was created, and it was designed to make you feel the way that you feel right now. We got the system we got, and all we can do is boycott and combat it. And that's all I got for you. So I hope you enjoyed Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 97. I'll try and break up, and the team and Azad will break up these videos with the team into as much resources as we can put together so you can share them with as many people as possible in whatever medium makes it as easy as possible, short, long, whatever. We're trying our best, but do please put some comments below and let me know what you'd like to see and how we can help in more ways and what you've learned from this, because I will read those comments and I reply wherever I can. I want to do this with peace, love, and unity. I don't see it happening. I'm following the money. I'm telling you what I believe to be the truth. And if it turns out not to be the truth, I'll tell you once I figured that one out as well. I'll see you this time next week for Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 98. Hopefully we'll get back to this week in Bitcoin, this week in macro, this week in geopolitics. And hopefully I won't have too many drones, bombs, assassinations, escalations to cover, where I can't cover what I originally came here to do, which was help people follow the money so that they can improve their life. Thank you. I'll see you this time next week. Peace.